Okay, so I'm with Rowanhorn right here. Now, he got into contact with me because he saw my previous debate with Amy Kay. Are you an AIU fan?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm friends with Devin.
Yeah, okay. So he's in that kind of circle of friends. You messaged me on Twitter asking specifically to debate the ethical principles of veganism, the way you put it. You said you wanted to argue that eating animals and animal products is perfectly ethical and moral for humans, and two, being vegan is a bad strategy to live forever. So
Yes.
why don't we just start off with the first topic you suggested? Sorry?
Your microphone is like cutting up in a weird way. It sounds like it's not plugged in properly.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Let me just fiddle with this for a second. Okay. Let me just check
I think
my
that's
sound
better.
settings. Is that better?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay, good. So why don't we start off with the ethics portion? Why do you think it's okay to murder and rape animals?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm not doing it for like health. I mean, I'm not doing it for taste pleasure. Okay. So you talk to some other people and they argue for taste pleasure. For me, it's about health and human health. We're justified in killing and eating animals if we think that's what we need to do for our health, because I think human health should come as a priority above animal lives. So basically, my premise is that the value of human life and human health is more important than animals. So that's one of my first arguments. And eventually, I'm going to want to talk to you. I'm going to want to ask you about like lower life forms, because I do agree that if we can switch to lower life forms,
Like insects, for instance?
insects and such, and like clams and these things, and even fish. You know, I'm an eater of sardines, and I do try to avoid the land animals. So like big, cows and pigs and stuff. So I don't think we should be eating cows and pigs. If we can be perfectly fine on insects and fish. And so that's one of my first thing is, and then the other thing I like to, I'm going to bring up is like the deficiencies. I think there's a lot of deficiencies that long-term vegans will run into. So like ex-vegan testimonials, though it's not like proof, it is a kind of evidence that I think we should take into consideration. Just the sheer amount of ex-vegans that are coming out with their stories of all these deficiencies they have. And I get into specific deficiencies that vegans run into. And I know you're a proponent of supplementation. And I'm going to ask you like something like, in the past, before people could supplement with stuff, B12 and this algae omega-3 that you had, were those people ethically justified to eat fish and marine food, foods from marine like shrimp and whatever, if that's the only way they can get these long chain omega-3, DHA, and EPA? So I want to know your perspective on that, because it seems to me that veganism, and even the way you promote veganism, it's only doable in the modern age with all these supplements that people have, and people couldn't do that before. So I want to know like what you think of these people in the past who couldn't supplement. So that's how I'm kind of ethically justifying the consumption of animal foods. And yeah, it's not ideal that people should be eating cows, but even if people thought that like there's something in cow meat specifically, I still think they're justified in eating cows, if that's because there's no proof that they don't need it. Like some people might need it. Like for instance, Casey, the vegetable police guy, he's obviously doing much better since consuming like a meat-only diet. And looking at ex-vegan testimonials, you can see that a lot of people, they couldn't heal from their chronic health conditions until they switched to eating at least a lot more animal foods, if not exclusively animal foods. So you can't deny the therapeutic value of animal foods to some people. And I would ask you, aren't these people ethically justified? But ultimately, what my argument comes down to is my point two, which is that I don't think it's the best strategy to live forever. And I have specific health studies we can talk about that I think a lot of the vegan health studies are flawed, the ones that would suggest that eating animal products are bad and cholesterol is bad. We can go into that. But ultimately, my argument comes down to, if someone thinks they need animal products, if somebody suspects that, if they're trying to listen to their body or whatever, and their body's saying, their body is screaming out for animal products, I think they're justified in doing so, because just the very possibility that they might need animal products in the long term would justify that, because veganism, in a sense, is a giant experiment. It is an experiment, and you can't show me, I'd like to challenge you to show me one culture that has been 100% vegan in the long term, and show me like a lifelong vegan that is a centenarian, that has lived past 100. Just show me one example. And
one?
Yeah, just one example of
there's actually a heart surgeon who's been vegan for, I think, 30 years, and he's over 100. I can't remember his name.
That's not lifelong.
Okay, well, it's kind of moving the goalposts kind of far back. I challenge you, can you find me one civilization or population ever that has never had issues with chronic disease?
No, I can't.
Right. So I wouldn't really attack this from this sort of argument. I know where you're coming from, where you're suggesting, okay, well, it kind of worries me that there hasn't ever been a big population of vegans, and we don't have, great data necessarily on a population scale. But the thing is, longest living population on Earth is the Californian Adventist vegetarians. A lot of people get it wrong that the Okinawans are the longest living population on Earth, and a lot of people tell me, oh, they eat a ton of pork and stuff. It's not actually true. They eat pork on holidays and shit like that. But Okinawans, they have the highest concentration of centenarians, so people living over 100, but they don't have the longest average life expectancy. Longest average life expectancy is actually the Californian Adventist vegetarians. And if you take a look at the Adventist mortality studies, I believe vegans came in second for longest life expectancy. Pescatarians came in first. Vegetarians came in third, and meat eaters came in last. So if you're talking about epidemiological research, my mic sounds bad again. Okay, do you hear anything bad with my mic?
It kind of was a little choppy there for just a second, but it's okay now, I think.
It is? Okay. All right, sorry.
Oh, it's getting a little choppy. Yeah, no, it still has that little bit of choppiness.
Okay, let me just fiddle around with it for a second.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think that might be better. I think you might have fixed it.
Okay. Anyway, if you look at the population data, vegans do quite well. In terms of, like, you're talking about basically a 2 to 3 year average difference between vegans and pescatarians. And vegans by far have the lowest risk of chronic disease. So heart disease, diabetes, cancer, like all cancer combined. There are certain cancer sites where the research is a little mixed, like with colorectal cancer. Sometimes vegans do worse than meat eaters. Most of the time they do better than meat eaters, but most of the research shows that vegetarians, people who eat dairy products, they do better for colorectal cancer than vegans. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. We can get into the details later on. But as far as overall health outcomes, vegans have very long life expectancy, extremely low rates of chronic disease compared to all other populations. So I don't think you really have anything to worry about there. I think the data is pretty clear just from a health outcome standpoint that it's just not reasonable to kill and eat animals for health, since vegans have the lowest risk of chronic disease, and we do have a very long life expectancy, at least better than the average population.
Wait, so you think vegans even have a lower risk of chronic disease than those like Seventh-day Adventists who are vegetarians, but they're eating some other animal foods? They're eating maybe dairy or fish.
I'm talking about that. No, I'm talking about the Seventh-day Adventists. There are Seventh-day Adventists who are vegetarian, vegan, and pescatarian. And among those Seventh-day Adventists who are vegan, they still have the lowest rate of chronic disease.
So they have lower rates of chronic disease than the vegetarians. Is what you're saying.
Yeah, even the vegetarians, particularly with ischemic heart disease.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I want to know those studies, like as far as, because sometimes these studies can be flawed. We can't really say that blanket statement that can apply to people who are eating like maybe better quality animal products. So those vegans, I mean, those vegetarians, you know, there's a difference between like the cholesterol that's like raw because it's not oxidized, right? Cooking damages cholesterol. So I'd want a comparison between a vegan who's eating raw cholesterol that's not been oxidized versus, you know, a vegan who's eating cooked cholesterol. I think that this is where these studies can be flawed because they're not accounting for the different quality of animal products. And like free range, and the animals are eating grass versus the animals are eating, you know, a bunch of grains. So that's a big thing right there.
Okay, so there's two things. Well, there's really three things there, but I'll go into detail in a second. Are you actually recommending that people eat animal products raw?
Some animal products I think are safe to eat raw, not meat. I don't think people should eat raw meat, but I think like a raw egg yolk is safe, and raw milk. And speaking of milk, I'd like to challenge you because I know you have all these gut issues and you've been trying probiotics and stuff.
Well, hold up. We can talk about that in a second, but I just want to cover this cholesterol thing you just mentioned. So you think eating raw egg yolks, raw milk is safe. You don't think eating raw meat is safe. So there is a higher risk of...
My microphone, I can't hear you. Keep on talking so I can get it right. Sometimes it slips out. Oh gosh.
Can you hear me okay?
How
about now?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. Now, there is a much higher risk of infectious disease when you eat raw egg yolks and raw milk. The dairy industry actually has a huge problem with this, where cows, it's a very frequent infection where like there's an infection around their udder, and if you don't pasteurize the milk, you can spread that infection to humans. Same with the egg industry. If you don't cook the yolk or cook the egg, very much higher likelihood of salmonella infection. You don't see an issue with that?
Well, you know, your chance of getting salmonella or this thing with the infected cow udder, it's going to be worse in animals that are like factory farmed, obviously, and I think you're going to have much less risk of that.
Not necessarily, because there are certain guidelines for organic farming where they can't give the animals antibiotics. So it's not necessarily lower.
Yeah, but like if the animals are healthy to begin with, like their immune system can fight off these infections, and they're less likely to be infected with salmonella to begin with.
Well,
like, so just the health of the diet of these animals is going to come into play, and all kinds of things like that. I think if you're eating like free range eggs and like grass-fed dairy on small farms the animals are really well cared for, it's just that risk is going to be so like not at a big issue. Okay, plus you can even take things on top of the dairy to like make sure if it was infected, you could take it with like antiviral herbs or natural antibiotic substances that would basically minimize that risk to such a small thing.
Okay, I can agree with you there on some level. Like for instance, certain chicken farmers, they actually have free range chickens where they're allowed outside. It's been proven that exposure to sunlight reduces risk of infection. Also because they're not kept in a like small confined space the entire time, packed in with other chickens, there's less risk of spreading infectious disease. I can agree with you on some level there. But the thing is, like, there is a practical reality you have to keep in mind. I think over 97% is the latest figure that came out. I think it was the USDA or something. 97% of animals are essentially factory farmed. So you're talking about having a huge fundamental change in the animal agriculture industry to
Yeah.
where it just wouldn't be profitable. Like most people would have to go vegan or vegetarian at least. So what you're promoting here, like I understand where you're coming from, but there is the practical reality of it just not working. It just wouldn't be economically viable. That's why we have factory farming. It's
Wait,
the
it
only
wouldn't be.
economically viable way.
So you
Sorry?
think it wouldn't be? You think it wouldn't be economically viable for the farmers, for there to be a bunch of small farmers and like Amish farmers that are making all this great, sustainable, healthy dairy and eggs and things like that?
You'd have to massively cut down on supply and massively increase cost.
Okay, well, I mean, well, supply and demand, right? Even if it eventually, if more
Yeah,
and more people
wouldn't be
want
able
it, there's going to be.
Well, here's the thing. The reason there's so much factory farming is because that's the only way to keep up with demand. When you're talking about grass-fed versus grain-fed livestock, you're talking about orders of magnitude more land you have to use. And you have much lower yield with that amount of land. So, like, you just wouldn't be able to keep up with the demand. I'm just telling you, I understand where you're coming from. Like, I can agree on some level that, yeah, using these farming practices would cut down on risk of infectious disease, whatnot, but it's just not economically viable. And even like if we're not going to use antibiotics to treat these animals, you're just increasing risk of infection. Infectious disease in humans originated from our close proximity to animals. Everything we have, from the common cold to smallpox, polio, everything came from animals. So there's a very high risk of infectious disease spreading from animal agriculture to begin with, and you're just kind of playing with fire when you eat these raw foods like raw milk, raw eggs, especially raw meat.
I
So
would agree about the raw meat, and I do agree that a lot of the viruses and everything that we get comes from animals and at the close proximity to animals. That's true.
I just also want to touch upon the oxidized cholesterol thing you mentioned.
Mhm.
Cholesterol is very susceptible to oxidation. There's actually research I referenced in a video I just made the other day where consuming eggs increases the susceptibility to LDL oxidation by like something like 50%. So when you raise cholesterol, it just has a tendency to oxidize to begin with. Also, red meat particularly promotes oxidation. So heme iron is a pro-oxidant,
Mhm.
and it also catalyzes the production of N-nitroso compounds, which are very potent cancer-causing carcinogens. Also, because heme iron is like this, it's a pro-oxidant. There's a very close relationship between heme iron consumption and risk of heart disease. I believe per milligram per day of heme iron intake, that increases risk of cardiovascular disease by almost 30%. I think it was 28 or 27 or 28%. So, like, how do you justify eating meat when, like, that's an issue?
Yeah, actually, I agree with you on that. I can't argue with that. I'm very aware of the dangers of heme iron myself, which is why I don't eat red meat. So health-wise, I can't really recommend people to eat red meat as a general rule. There might be rare exceptions. I guess Casey, the vegetable police, he's doing this on a short-term basis for his, gut issues. But long-term, I have to agree with you. I don't think eating red meat is going to be good at all for longevity,
Okay.
mainly to do with the heme iron. And that's why the meat I do eat is like white meat in the form of sardines. So I think there's going to be there is less heme iron in sardines than like bloody, like red meat. And then I take a lot of things to kind of detoxify iron from my body, iron binders that kind of take iron out of the body as well. You can do that to.
No, you can't. What are you taking? Is it a supplement, or did you hear this on a website, like some sort of herb remedy?
There are herbs that inhibit iron absorption and even take iron out of your body. Even actually
Take iron out of your body?
raw milk will bind to iron and actually suck iron out of your body because it has lactose.
No. It inhibits iron absorption, but as far as I'm aware, there's no way to get iron out of your body short of like literally bleeding out. Your body has no regulatory mechanism of ridding itself of iron. I agree with you there that there are certain things that can inhibit iron absorption, including dairy. But as far as getting iron out of your body, that's not possible. You can't.
So you think there's no way to chelate iron out of your body, excess iron?
No,
just by
not
consuming a
not
certain
short
food.
of cutting yourself open and bleeding out.
Yeah, I was thinking from my research, I thought that there was something in milk that actually would kind of almost like a natural form of bloodletting just by like eating the dairy, that it would suck iron out of your body because the lactoferrin. I'll have to double check that. I'm not 100%.
I've never heard of anything like that myself. I'd be interested to see research, but as far as I'm aware, there's no way of actually ridding iron from your body. You can only inhibit iron absorption.
Okay, yeah. So if people do eat meat, they definitely want to take it with like an iron binder to inhibit the absorption. I think they're going to be much better off, and I've recommended that to people before. So, yeah, I think we're in agreement about the heme iron thing, a bad thing for longevity. So,
Okay, so
I guess the meat I am promoting would be like sardines and then like insects. So I'd want to hear your opinion, your thoughts on like insects.
So fish and insects.
Yeah. And then even like shrimp and lower, marine animals, because I agree with that we should eventually try to move away from like chicken farming, because I do think a lot of viruses come from chickens, like these bird flus and stuff. If we're having all this chicken agriculture, we could have more of that. So I do agree that we should, as a society, we should move more towards farming things in like fish farming and making fish really ethically sustainable. Yeah, like natural, healthy fish farming where it's like we're controlling their environment. It's not, we're feeding them healthy, and we can have our healthy fats from fish as opposed to like egg yolks. I don't think egg yolks are ideal.
Okay, well, tell me, what are healthy fats?
I think healthy fats are a lot of vegetarian fats like coconut oil, vegetable fats. But
Why is
then,
coconut oil healthy?
well, I think coconut oil is healthy for its medium chain triglycerides, which is like fuel for your brain. And I'm more of the train of thought that like ketosis is a healthy state to be in. And I'm not convinced by all these studies that suggest that saturated fat is bad for you. And I don't think they've proven that coconut oil is bad for you, or even grass-fed butter.
Okay,
and
well, the
of course,
reasoning
the fats in fish, I think, are healthy as well. Fish fat.
Okay, well, the reasoning behind why a lot of people now think coconut oil, along with like butter and all forms of saturated fat, are bad for you is because it's being demonstrably proven at this point to increase LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol has been identified as the biggest risk factor of ischemic heart disease. And practically speaking, the American Heart Association just released a big review of the research, and they found that replacing saturated fat with poly and monounsaturated fats, so like from sources like olive oil, avocado oil, flax seeds, hemp, things like that, it reduces risk of coronary heart disease, or sorry, just heart disease in general.
I don't know about those studies. I think I'm really a skeptic. A lot of these studies have they tested it on like healthy? Like, what type of coconut oil were they using? Were they using like refined coconut oil, or was it like extra virgin coconut oil? Like, there's different qualities. Huh?
No, look, it doesn't matter what type of quality it is. The way saturated fat is metabolized in your body, it raises serum cholesterol, and that's the most important risk factor for heart disease. Now,
I mean, I've seen studies that even suggest like high LDL cholesterol is associated with overall less mortality, like less death.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's a topic that I know a lot about. So give me details on these studies. I think I know the exact ones you're referring to as well.
Well, I have one study that says, there's a study that kind of exonerates cholesterol as being it doesn't really increase risk of death. And actually, the risk of death happens if you have low cholesterol level, according to this study.
Was that published in the British Medical Journal?
I
know there was a pretty recent one that was a pretty huge study, and it was published in the British Medical Journal.
I have one in PubMed that says low cholesterol is associated with mortality from stroke, heart disease, and cancer.
And what was the age of the population?
The Jitchi Medical School cohort study. The age of the population is 40 to 69 years.
Okay, so elderly. This is
Yeah.
a reverse causation effect. So what can happen is when you get sick, there's a bunch of confounding variables that can occur. So typically when you do get sick, you have a loss of appetite. I'm sure you've gotten the flu or something before and you just didn't want to eat. That can lower your cholesterol. Certain parasites, bacterial infections, viral infections, they can have a direct effect on your lipid metabolism and actually consume some of the cholesterol in your body. That can lower your cholesterol. Certain cancers themselves actually use cholesterol for growth and proliferation. That can lower your cholesterol. Certain medications to deal with these illnesses, that can lower your cholesterol directly. And again, if you include things like getting sick, having loss of appetite, having to take medication, that can all play a role in lowering your cholesterol. So what you'll find is with elderly populations, you'll typically see this sort of phenomenon happening where people with the lowest levels of cholesterol will end up dying sooner. But that's not because they have low cholesterol, it's because they got sick, their cholesterol levels plummeted, and then death happened. And it's just because they got sick.
Yeah, so you're saying it's like more correlation, not causation.
Well,
and that actually makes a lot of sense.
Well, right. It's kind of correlation versus causation. These studies aren't, the correlation isn't strong enough to show a cause and effect relationship. And again, if you actually look at other research here, I'll give you the exact study name. Sequence variations in PCSK9, low LDL, and protection against coronary heart disease. So there's a gene called PCSK9. What it does is it codes for certain protein that bonds to LDL receptors in your body cells. Now, there are sequence variations in this gene which can cause it to act abnormally, not produce this protein. So more of the cholesterol in your blood like goes out of your blood, bonds to the receptor sites in your cells, and this lowers LDL cholesterol. Now, these people who have these this PCSK9 gene mutation, they have massively reduced risk of coronary heart disease. They identified a mutation in the PCSK9 gene that caused a 28% reduction in mean LDL cholesterol, and that reduced coronary heart disease risk by 88%. And they also identified another mutation, reduced LDL cholesterol by 15%, and that resulted in a 47% reduced risk of coronary heart disease. So even from this one study, you can actually see the relationship between heart disease and cholesterol is linear. There's also other research that I've linked before where they also identified a linear relationship between serum LDL cholesterol and rate of progression of atherosclerosis. So it's just a reverse causation effect. The vast majority of the time when you see this research where it shows people with the low cholesterol levels at higher rates of disease or death, it's almost always elderly populations. There's also a few odd situations where pregnant women, or there's some weird particular subset of the population where they find this correlation. But it's really just because they got sick, they had lower cholesterol, and like low cholesterol in these populations basically is an identifier of them being really ill. It's not the low cholesterol that caused it, though.
That makes sense. I mean, that could be. So I guess what I want to ask you is, like, if cholesterol is so bad for you, and foods high in cholesterol are so bad for you, why is Japan, which has the highest egg consumption of any cultures, and they're
Are you sure it's not the Chinese?
No, it's Japan at the highest egg consumption, and I could even like screen share this chart. And they also have they're the longest living culture in the world, and they have the highest egg consumption. So
no, it's the Adventist vegetarians that are the longest living.
Longest living than the Japanese, the Adventists.
Yeah. It is a smaller population, but they are considered the longest living population. So this this can get a little confusing. So what you'll find is when egg consumption increases, there's a lot of conflicting research about whether or not this increases risk of heart disease. So there's this phenomenon that happens where the higher your baseline cholesterol intake is, the less of a change any added dietary cholesterol will make to your serum cholesterol score. So let's say you were eating a standard American diet, you were eating about 500 milligrams of cholesterol per day. So that's about 1 egg and maybe a chicken breast. If you added another egg to your diet, that would cause little to no change in your serum cholesterol. So when you see research like this that finds increased egg consumption results in no increased risk of heart disease, that's really what's going on. It's just because that population has such a high cholesterol intake to begin with that adding eggs to their diet really isn't making that much of a difference. Also, I lost my train of thought. Well, anyway, you can also look at just the overall diet and lifestyle of these people. Like, I mean, the Japanese, they eat healthier overall diets, live more active lifestyles generally than your average American, but things are kind of narrowing. Japanese are kind of eating a more standard American diet now, and their health is in decline. That's both from increased consumption of meat and like just fast food in general, which is even worse. So I'd want to actually see research on this, like whether or not Japanese eat more cholesterol on average than Americans. I don't think they do, but I don't think it matters much.
They're eating all that fish and everything, but basically,
well, not really. Like fish tends to be a bit lower in cholesterol, but certain fish can be worse than even beef. I think in general, Japanese have historically eaten better diets than Americans. Like, you know, their dietary staple is rice. They eat a lot of vegetables. You know, the meat they do eat is fish. I know a lot of Japanese and Chinese are Buddhist, and there's a certain subset of Buddhism where they kind of treat eggs as if it's some sort of holy food. So it wouldn't surprise me that they do eat a lot of eggs, but that doesn't really say much about their overall diet and lifestyle.
Plus, they eat natto. They put that natto on the rice, and they put like a raw egg on there. You see that?
Yeah, I've seen that.
So it could be even that they're eating more raw egg cholesterol. You know, cholesterol in the form of raw eggs, as opposed to like fried eggs, like we see that's popular in America. People are scrambling their eggs. They're oxidizing all that cholesterol. But basically, you want me to think it's a coincidence that the longest living culture, I guess, other than the Seventh-day Adventists, who have the highest egg consumption. It's not like, we don't think it's the egg consumption that's correlating with their longevity yet.
Well, my argument would be their overall diet and lifestyle has historically been better, even if their egg intake is higher. And you're talking about population averages. So even if their egg intake is higher per capita than the United States, that doesn't mean your average Japanese is eating more cholesterol per day than your average American.
Yeah, that would be interesting too.
And also, saturated fat is also a huge factor here. I think there's a much stronger correlation between saturated fat and heart disease than cholesterol itself. And I'd really strongly argue that the Japanese eat less saturated fat. You also have to consider...
if saturated fat was such an issue, why would Switzerland and Iceland be right under Japan as being like the longest living cultures? And we know Switzerland and Iceland eat tons of saturated fat in the form of like cheese and dairy. These are like the highest dairy consumption cultures, Iceland and Switzerland, and they're right under Japan in as far as life expectancy.
Life expectancy can be a very misleading statistic, especially in modern westernized countries. We have cholesterol lowering medication. We have stents, which if you have a blockage in your artery, it's like a tube that goes down and it can puff out your artery again. Modern medicine can make up for chronic disease. I think that's really what's going on here. I'd rather look at chronic disease statistics rather than mortality overall. Because modern medicine kind of makes up the difference, but quite a bit. Like my grandfather, he had, I think, 2 heart attacks, and he wouldn't have been alive if it wasn't for modern medicine. He had to take medication. He had a stent put in, like he had surgery. He would have been dead like 40 fucking years ago if it wasn't for modern medicine, but he lived until 84 because of modern medicine. So
Mhm.
yeah, so medical advancements make up the difference quite a bit. Again, if you look at the populations with the lowest rate of chronic disease, it's always people following plant-based diets.
Okay, and you think even adding a little, I just want to get this straight. You think even adding a little bit of animal foods, even if they're the healthiest quality, the cholesterol's not been oxidized, let's say one raw egg a day, or like a small glass of raw milk, you think that's actually going to lower your lifespan? You think that's actually going to lower your lifespan?
Yeah.
As opposed to maybe fill in a void of some kind of nutritional deficiency you might have. I would think that there would be like a good thing as an insurance to make sure you're getting all the nutrients.
If we're talking about like eating one raw egg a day or something, yeah, I would say it would lower your life expectancy, assuming you're comparing the diets equally. Like we can talk about vegan nutrient deficiencies, but historically speaking, vegans have had issues getting enough B12. The recent study that's come out of Sweden, I believe, vegans had the same rate of B12 deficiency, which is like virtually zero as meat eaters. But I think this has affected some of these mortality statistics quite a bit. Like what the Adventist Health studies, like they started back in like the 70s and 80s. Well, that was back before like Facebook, YouTube, big, huge plant-based doctors like Dr. Michael Greger. I think even as far back like as the 70s and 80s, you couldn't just get a B12 supplement off the store shelf. You actually needed a prescription for it. So it's kind of hard to rely on data like that when there have been some pretty huge cultural changes. But I would say if you were to eat like add a raw egg to your diet or some fish, that would lower your life expectancy just because of increased risk of chronic disease, particularly heart disease. That's the #1 killer of humans.
And so what would be your best source of evidence that would suggest that even eating like one raw egg a day would increase your risk of death?
I can give you the exact meta-analysis I rely on. Just give me one moment. I just want to get the name right. I just had a big argument with a guy named Jeff Nippert about this. He was trying to argue with me that dietary cholesterol doesn't raise serum cholesterol, but this meta-analysis completely debunks this. It's loading for a second. It's a full-text PDF.
And yeah, like I definitely want to talk about just like the sheer amount of like ex-vegans. And I know this isn't like proof, this is a different type of evidence here, but the ex-vegans, and how do you explain all these ex-vegans are just having these massive health problems? They all run into deficiency. They all seem to just run into some horrible problem. And then they start eating some raw eggs, they start eating some grass-fed raw dairy, and all their health problems go away. I guess you would just say they weren't doing the diet correctly. Is that what you would say? They weren't supplementing properly, but they should have been taking their algae omega-3 and all this sort of thing. Is that right?
Not necessarily. We can get into that for a second, but I'd say the best evidence available that eating something like one egg a day would increase risk of heart disease. This meta-analysis, Effect of Dietary Cholesterol on Serum Cholesterol, a meta-analysis and review, author Paul N. Hopkins. So what's interesting about this meta-analysis is they only use metabolic ward research, which is the best form of research possible for this particular subject. You have the most amount of control. He combined added dietary cholesterol and baseline cholesterol together in a mathematical model. So again, a lot of this research, which has shown added dietary cholesterol doesn't increase serum cholesterol, that's because they started off with study participants that were essentially eating a terrible diet. If you start off with a baseline cholesterol intake of 0, that will have the most significant impact on your LDL cholesterol score. And that's why heart disease is so common in every population. And you can go back thousands of years. The Horus study found ancient remains, like mummified remains of even like pre-agricultural hunter-gatherers, and they still had atherosclerosis. That's because you have to basically eat a very, very strict plant-based diet to avoid raising your serum cholesterol above the safe, healthy physiological range.
Well, how do we know their heart disease wasn't caused by all the starches and grains they were eating? Like in the case of the Egyptians, did they eat a lot of grains? Pretty sure they did.
You can look at, like, there's ancient remains of Eskimos, or Inuit if you prefer, where they had advanced atherosclerosis, and I think that 40-year-old mummy.
And in the case of the Eskimos, we don't know that their heart disease is being caused by the cholesterol in itself. It could be caused by that they're getting their cholesterol in the form of red meat, as opposed to a vegetarian source of cholesterol, such as egg yolks or raw milk. What if that's the way?
They're eating marine mammals. That's a huge source of their dietary intake, and they eat a lot of blubber. So I don't think they're eating a lot of heme iron comparatively to, like, say, normal, typical North American population. Also, there's actually research showing that as the Inuit have moved to a more standard American diet, so literally adding like Twinkies to their diet, refined bread and stuff like that, their rates of ischemic heart disease have actually gone down. So as they've replaced whale blubber with like bread and Twinkies, ischemic heart disease rates have actually gone down.
They got to be eating like some red meat. I've seen these like pictures of Eskimo children just chowing down on some like raw caribou or something, like their just faces all bloody. They got to be getting a lot of, and organs. Aren't they eating like organs of animals and the liver and all these really high iron sources? They got to be.
In order to eat a carnivore diet, you have to eat organs, or else you won't get enough things like vitamin C. There's no way to eat a carnivore diet and not eat organs.
Yeah.
Also things like, I think magnesium. There's a few other, folate. Folate's a big one. You can't get that without eating organs. So, I mean, there are certain aspects of their diet that isn't ideal that I think both you and me can agree on. But you can look at every culture all throughout history. They've all had heart disease. You can go back thousands of years. So my point is, you need to eat a very, very strict plant-based diet, eat meat virtually never, to keep your cholesterol levels low enough to where heart disease won't progress. And I'll just reference another study here. Relation between progression and regression of atherosclerotic left main coronary artery disease and serum cholesterol levels, as assessed with serial long-term 12 months or more follow-up via intravascular ultrasound. So what they found here was the cutoff point where atherosclerosis will not progress. So basically the clogging of your arteries. It's when your LDL cholesterol is below 75 milligrams per deciliter. If it's above that, atherosclerosis will progress. And in order to get your cholesterol levels that low, you really need to be on a vegan diet, essentially. Maybe you could get away with eating like a small portion of meat like once or twice a month, but yeah.
Okay, well, are you sure these studies have accounted for the variables, such as like when most people go vegan or whatever, they're also doing a lot of other healthy lives. They're making a lot of other healthy changes in their life. They're less likely to be a smoker and a drinker, and they're probably exercising more than the average person. So are these studies accounting for the different variables that could be going on? And then there's the quality of the animal products. Like, are they talking about people who are eating grass-fed meat versus processed meat? I think a lot of these studies, they're not accounting for the differences of and how do we know that a lot of these people who have the high cholesterol, it's not necessarily, it's just they're getting their cholesterol in the form of these very high heme iron sources as opposed to the non-heme iron sources of cholesterol?
Okay.
Are they showing all these different variables, and are they accounting for all these things? Because you can get cholesterol without any heme iron, right? You can just eat grass-fed butter. You wouldn't be getting any heme iron from that. It's completely iron-free, but you're getting all that cholesterol. How do we know that specifically would cause heart disease?
Okay, wait. So you're asking, how do we know specifically that cholesterol itself isn't causing heart disease and it's just these other lifestyle factors? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've proven that with the genetic research I referenced earlier. Sequence variations in PCSK9, low LDL, and protection against coronary heart disease. So this is a genetic study. And what's great about this is it just puts the nail in the coffin about like all these questions. They're valid questions, by the way. Like, are these people smoking? Are these people eating like terrible quality foods? They're valid questions, and this basically answers this. People who have low LDL, just because of genetics, they have lower rates of heart disease. So this is completely separate from any other lifestyle factors. Smoking, exercise, dietary quality. So cholesterol itself is the only factor here that's actually meaningfully changing the risk of heart disease. Also, in the study I just told you about, they took Black subjects. So Black people in the United States, they're at a particularly high risk of heart disease and hypertension. There's a number of reasons for that. Like, there's a lot of Black people who are poor. They eat like shitty processed food diets. I think among some areas, like Black people even smoke more often. The Black subjects, they had a 28% reduction in mean LDL cholesterol, 88% reduction in risk of coronary heart disease. So even among people who are at particularly high risk because of a multitude of lifestyle and socioeconomic factors, they don't make as much money, they're more stressed, they eat shittier food on average, they tend to be more overweight, have higher rates of hypertension. Low cholesterol due to genetic variables lowered the risk of heart disease. So it's the cholesterol itself. Now, all those things do play into it, but you do have to recognize that cholesterol itself is a risk factor for heart disease. And again, we know the exact amount of cholesterol that's safe. It's below 75 milligrams per deciliter. Once you go above that range, atherosclerosis will progress.
And for these people with a genetic deformity that gives them lower level of LDL, how do we know that that deformity doesn't also just happen to come with another deformity that does something good for their health? Like, that's
Like
a
what?
possibility, right? Like, I mean, maybe the body,
really.
because it has this, it could be because it has this particular deformity, the body is having to like create an adaptation and make up for this this deformity in some other way that's actually turning on a specific epigenetic switch in their body and making them, it's giving them a different reason for their longevity rather than the low LDL itself. That could just be a correlation, not causation type of thing.
Okay, well, I wouldn't necessarily call it a deformity because literally everyone has some sort of mutation. There's just a thing called genetic variation. Secondly, if you look at the overall research, people who follow plant-based diets that are low in cholesterol, low in saturated fat, they on average have lower cholesterol scores, much lower rates of heart disease. We have laboratory testing where we take patients who are at risk for heart disease. We take a look at their cholesterol scores, and we see that the people who have a LDL cholesterol score above 75 milligrams per deciliter, atherosclerosis progresses. Below 75 milligrams per deciliter, atherosclerosis either doesn't change or it actually reduces. And on top of that, we have this genetic data where people, even in high-risk populations, they have low LDL cholesterol levels, and that results in lower rates of heart disease. Also, like, you can look into sequence variations in the PCSK9 gene. It, as far as I can tell, it doesn't actually affect any other kind of thing in the body other than just cholesterol metabolism.
I'm just wondering if, like, I mean, this is totally a stretch. I don't have evidence for this, but like, what if like cholesterol isn't a factor in heart disease if you're also lower in carbohydrates? Let's say you're on a ketogenic diet and all you eat is fat and you're hardly eating any carbs at all. You know, that might make cholesterol not an issue.
There was a Harvard cohort study, and they compared people on a vegan low carb ketogenic diet. I think they called it the Eco-Atkins diet. And they studied people who were on a traditional low carb ketogenic style diet. The people on the low carb diet, I believe they didn't have a significantly increased risk of heart disease compared to the general population, but they had a much higher risk of heart disease compared to the people on the vegan low carb ketogenic diet. Also, the people on the low carb diet, they had higher risk of diabetes and cancer and all-cause mortality. So again, with these heart disease claims too, you kind of have to understand that the entire population is at very high risk of heart disease. So when you're going to compare somebody on a low carb ketogenic diet to the general population, there's probably not going to be that much of a difference. But if you compare them to people on a vegan diet, there's a pretty huge difference in disease rates there.
Okay, so let's talk about an animal food that's maybe does fish? I don't think fish raises your cholesterol that much, right? It's not even.
No, it would. They contain saturated fat and cholesterol. And again, the meta-analysis I referenced before, effects of dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol, meta-analysis and review. When you start from a cholesterol intake of 0, so you're on a vegan diet, any added dietary cholesterol will have the most significant impact. So these foods that are considered low in cholesterol, quote unquote, or low in saturated fat, quote unquote, that will have the most significant impact to your cholesterol score. And again, if you look at the data, you have to be on a very, very strict plant-based diet to get your LDL cholesterol below 75 milligrams per deciliter. I just made a video the other day where they actually took vegetarians. This was a study out of India. So these were people who were vegetarian their entire life. They made them have a washout period for the study where they couldn't consume any eggs. So they only had dairy, just low-fat dairy, by the way, so skim milk. Their mean LDL cholesterol score was still in the 90s. So over 20 points above the safe, healthy, like physiological range. So again, you have to be on a very, very strict plant-based diet. You can't eat like fish, a little bit of dairy, some eggs here and there. It would raise your cholesterol score above the safe, healthy physiological range.
Here's a question for you. I want to know your thoughts on this. Like, if humans have been eating, I'm sure you even agree that humans like have been eating things like fish and some eggs. Why haven't, like, for a long time, we're hunter-gatherers, right? Like, from an evolutionary perspective, if this is a natural part of our diet that we've been eating for such a long time, why haven't we developed some adaptation to be able to handle some cholesterol without it killing us? Does that even make sense from an evolutionary perspective that this food?
We have actually.
But you just think not enough.
So if you look at animal experiments like rodents, rabbits, if you feed them like saturated fat and cholesterol, their LDL will skyrocket and they'll develop heart disease extraordinarily quickly, and you can kill them in a laboratory setting in like a matter of weeks. Humans, we've developed an adaptation for regulating cholesterol, but it's not perfect. A lot of these biological adaptations, they're buffers, not a full stop. So again, back to the meta-analysis I gave you before, effective dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol, meta-analysis and review. So when you eat no cholesterol, you add cholesterol to your diet, you'll see a big increase in your serum cholesterol. Now, if you're already eating a lot of cholesterol and you add more, you'll see little to no change. So that suggests your body does have a regulatory mechanism. It's like some sort of, it basically regulates absorption in the enterocyte, which is basically the lining of your intestines, where it won't absorb the cholesterol. Now that's only a buffer. Again, you can raise your serum cholesterol above the safe, healthy, normal range, but that biological mechanism that acts as a buffer, it will prevent your cholesterol going so fucking high that you'll develop heart disease in your teens or 20s. But there are, again, genetic mutations, familial hypercholesterolemia. People who are heterozygotes for that disease, you can see case reports of people dying in their late 20s, early 30s of heart disease when they go untreated. And homozygotes for the disease, they can have cholesterol scores in the 500s and plus. And you can see case reports of people dying before they even reach their teens. So again, we have made adaptations to kind of deal with cholesterol, but they're not good.
Are they good enough? Okay,
they're good enough to let you live into adulthood.
Are they good enough that maybe you can handle eating an egg, one egg a week? Or is that, it's still too much? Or one egg a month? Or how about one egg a year? I mean, is one egg a year going to increase your risk of death?
Okay, well, Well, here's the thing. Like, it's an interesting idea, but I consider this mostly mental masturbation. If we can recognize that something isn't healthy and it's also unethical, like you're killing an animal that wants to live, like, why
Okay,
do
but
it? I mean,
what about something like
but
cheese or eggs that aren't killing animals?
I'll answer your question. It's
Yeah.
fine. But I just want to point that out.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, if we're talking about reducing risk of heart disease as much as possible, you'd have to eat a small enough amount of cholesterol that you wouldn't chronically raise your LDL cholesterol above 70 milligrams per deciliter, which is about the cutoff point where atherosclerosis progresses. So, like maybe one egg a month, that might be enough. Like that might be little enough, but you're talking about very, very small amounts. And there is variation between individuals. Some people hyper respond to dietary cholesterol and saturated fat intake. So some people might have to eat even less. Also, like let's say you're only slightly above that range. Let's say you're like in the 90s, just a little bit above that safe, healthy range. So chances are you won't develop, like heart disease won't progress to the point where it's clinically relevant, like you won't be hospitalized for it. But the issue there is you're affecting your entire circulatory system, including your brain. And you'll see like up until like in the 80s, once you get up into the 80s range, almost everyone starts developing dementia, even if they don't have like heart disease that's to the point where it's debilitating. The reason for that is the way your circulatory system in your brain works. If there's even a small amount of plaque buildup, that can have a massive, massive effect on like blood flow in your brain. So it's not a good idea to kind of play around with this shit. Like if you're really interested in living for a long time and having a good quality of life, yeah, okay, you can eat like one egg a day, avoid heart disease, or sorry, not one egg a day, like one egg a month. Like say you're kind of teetering on the edge there of like developing heart disease. It's not good for your brain in the long run, and just overall health in general.
Well, I'm interested in living not only a long time, but forever. And
Yeah.
I want to ask you about that too. Eventually, we have to talk about like, do you even want to? I want to know if you want to live forever.
Yeah, my plan is to upload my consciousness into an AI.
Huh? Do you really think the consciousness can be transferred
Yeah.
to an AI robot or something?
If you can perfectly replicate the way my brain works and memories and everything, then yeah, what's the difference? That's basically a mind transfer.
Are you afraid of death? Would you say?
No.
I know we're totally getting off topic here, but
No,
I
no,
want
it's
to
cool.
ask.
It's interesting. I
Yeah.
like just talking with you. You're an
Uh-huh.
all right, reasonable dude. No, I'm not afraid of dying at all. I've had like multiple people point guns at me, and I was dead sure they were going to shoot me, and I was like, "Well, guess I'm dying today." So no, it's not something that scares me. I've had quite a few near-death experiences, and no, it's just not something that's scary.
And if you die, you do think you would cease to exist, but it still doesn't scare you. The idea of just ceasing to exist, just that doesn't. It obviously bothers you because you want to live forever. You would prefer to live forever if you could.
I like here's the thing. I don't think you necessarily cease to exist. I've made videos about this. I've had like a lot of psychedelic and out-of-body experiences where I don't think consciousness ends in your death. Like basically the matter that makes up your being, it's made up of foods you've consumed. So you know, all the animals and all the minerals and vitamins that make up your environment, well, you're it. And when you die, you're just going to basically go back into the environment and other beings are going to consume you and you're going to become a part of their consciousness. So it's not that I believe in reincarnation where I'll end up becoming a fish or a leopard or something and like I'll have the same mind. I don't believe in something like that, but I just basically think you kind of melt into everything around you. It's
Does it comfort you? I mean, that doesn't seem like a very comforting thought. The idea that the
no,
matter
actually
that
it
makes up
doesn't.
your thought, yeah. So it's not
Actually
like
it
your
doesn't.
consciousness.
I've had a few people accuse me of this where it's a coping mechanism with death, but I've had psychedelic experiences where I literally suffered for eternity because I'd constantly keep being essentially reincarnated into other organisms, and I had to live life as a fucking spider, and that just was shit. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's not actually a comforting thought, but that's what I think happens.
What about any other alternative methods besides mind uploading as far as living forever? Do you think it's you want to cure aging? I'm sure you want the scientists to cure aging. Would you rather live forever in your physical body if you could as an option rather than just a hope that you could transfer your consciousness to a robot?
Eventually, even if we could completely prevent aging, like I could just stay this age forever, I would
Mhm.
eventually die. So it is necessary to actually upload your mind into a machine just because there's a much higher rate of survivability. So like eventually the sun is going to swallow the earth. I mean, some punk kid can come up and shoot me in the back of the head. Like anything could happen. It's very easy to kill a biological life form. With an AI, you can replicate your consciousness, and you could even replicate your consciousness on other planets, and you could basically have like a RAID array where it's essentially a memory backup to prevent anything from being destroyed. So in that sense, you could basically be infinite, live forever, extort, like unless the entire universe just completely collapses in on itself, you'd still survive. So like
Yeah.
eventually AI is going to be the issue here.
That sounds great in theory if you were actually able to transfer your consciousness from the physical brain you have now to some, robotic.
Well, you're talking about copying, right?
Yeah, because it could just be a copy of you. It could create thousands of copies, but if you're the brain you have right now, if that dies and ceases to exist, it might be that you never were able to transfer your consciousness outside of the
Well,
brain you
you
have.
are. Well, you are. A perfect copy is a transfer of consciousness. Like Star Trek, like the teleportation technology they use in
Yeah.
Star Trek, that's a literal copy. So you're technically killing yourself each time you go
Mhm.
through the teleporter. So are you really killing
Well,
yourself if it's the exact
yes,
same thing?
that's what I would think. You're killing yourself, and then you're creating a different, entirely different consciousness. But I guess it's all hypothetical. None of us can say for sure
Well,
if it's not.
that's why I think consciousness extends beyond your own body, and that's why I've like that's one of the reasons why I've chosen not to have children. I don't think it matters whether you're a copy or if you get destroyed and then like the exact same part of you lives on. I mean, like it's just a different way of looking at reality. I care more about memes than genes. Like if something is existing that has the exact same mind as me, I think I'm still existing.
Hmm.
So and like the cells in your body, they get replaced every so often. So are you the same person you were 10 years ago? So I don't think it really that really doesn't really matter to me. It's an interesting topic. I mean, I'd like to talk about it with you some more, but let's get back on the topic
Yeah,
of
let's get it.
health.
So you want to talk about? I want to know your opinion on all these like ex-vegan testimonials, and in any case, do you think it's ever justified to eat animal products? Let's put the meat aside, put the cows aside. I mean, do you think it's? I want to hear your reasoning for why it's unethical just to kill a very small life forms such as insects or even like a sardine. Okay, I don't eat cows, but I eat sardines because I feel like obviously they're not brain dead. They have some consciousness going on, but it's so small. It's such a minimal level that my health, it seems to would take priority over the life of a sardine. Am I unethical for eating a sardine, in your opinion?
Yes. Like again, if we look at the medical science, there's like mechanistically speaking, there's no health benefit to eating a sardine. Even if we like, if I'm very generous and we look at population data, so populations of vegans compared to pescatarians, you're talking about like a 2 or 3 year extension on your life while you're killing how many animals over your lifetime. It just doesn't work out. And if we talk about quality of life, well, you're going to have a lower risk of chronic disease as a vegan, even if necessarily you won't live the absolute maximum lifespan possible, which again, there's like these weird population trends with like lack of B12 and shit that we could get into, but it just doesn't add up to me. Why is living an extra 2 or 3 years more valuable than killing thousands of animals like a sardine over your lifetime?
Because living an extra 2 or 3 years, that could buy me enough time to the point where scientists have cured aging. And if I don't extend my life those extra 3 years, that could be the difference between my life and death. If I'm trying to live forever, 2 or 3 years could be a big difference, because if I die 3 years earlier, then the scientists figure out how to cure aging 2 or 3 years later, and I'm dead, and it doesn't help me anymore. So it's that whole idea that we want to live as long as possible for the sake of our eternal life. And that's why the 3 years is a big difference, even if it's just 3 years, because that 3 years could get me eternal life.
Okay, well, that's a big hypothetical there. So I still don't think that's valid just at face value. Also, there are certain aspects of aging that you just can't reverse.
But you don't think it's valid to like an increase? We're talking about an increased odds of me getting to live forever. That's a big deal. Even if you think it's just a small increased odds, I mean, we're talking some amount of increased chance that I get to live forever. That's a big deal. It's worth killing some fish. I mean, these fish are going to die anyways. In nature, they're going to be eaten by a shark or some other
You're
bigger.
going to die anyway.
Well, how do you know that? I might live forever.
Well, no. If you're only interested in continuing your biological existence, you're eventually going to die.
Well, you don't know that because that's hypothetical. You don't know that I'm going to die.
No. If you're only going to prolong your biological existence, you will eventually die. Like some punk kid could just shoot you in the back of the head. You could get a disease. Like reversing aging doesn't protect you against disease, like infectious disease. There's lots of ways for you to die.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
but those ways for me to die aren't necessarily going to happen. Like, for instance, I could live in a super ultra safe fortified bunker and where I don't get murdered, and I could just avoid all risks and maybe live forever. So what I'm saying is I have the chance and the potential chance to live forever, whereas these fish in the ocean, they're not going to live forever. So if these organisms that can't live forever, if they have to be sacrificed to increase my chance of living forever, which I have a good chance of living forever because I can do all these things, and we can cure aging, and I might cure all diseases and everything with science. So that is a huge ethical justification.
Well, first of all, this hinges on the idea that fish will actually prolong your existence, which there actually isn't any evidence for. All we have is population data, where it just turns out that a population of pescatarian Adventists tend to live slightly longer than vegan Adventists. And again, there's like population trends that you have to keep into account there. The vegan Adventists were likely, a lot of them suffered from like B12 deficiency. I know up until this day, vegans still have issues with zinc. That tends to be the #1 issue. But yeah, basically all that suggests to me is just in that particular time period, in that particular population, vegans just did slightly worse in terms of like life expectancy, but they did still do better in terms of chronic disease risk. And again, if you're worried about living forever, like this new technology where it would let you reverse aging, there's certain aspects of aging that you can't reverse. If you lose brain mass from aging, you can't reverse that.
Are you sure? There might be some way.
No, you can't.
Neurogenesis, you could like take stuff to regrow your brain. You don't think?
You could possibly regrow brain tissue in the future. Like, I wouldn't say that's totally out of the question, but the thing is, like, at that point, are you still going to be you? How much of your brain can you lose, and how much new brain can you grow and still be you?
I think, because if you're slowly regrowing your brain, it could like CBD oil has neurogenic properties, so it's growing more brain cells.
You mean neuroprotective?
Neurogenerative, it actually grows new brain cells.
Okay.
Neurogenesis. And
I
lion's mane mushroom, these types of mushrooms that have actually
psilocybin.
neurogenesis properties. Oh, lion's mane.
I think now I don't know too much about this topic myself, but I think you're confusing growing brain cells with making new neurological connections, which I believe is two different things, but I don't know too much about the topic.
Mm-hmm.
I just know from reading about Alzheimer's, there's absolutely no way to reverse the disease, and all you can do is stop it. You can just stop it from progressing, because once you lose brain tissue, like, that's it. It doesn't come back. So you can, as far as I know, like, neuroscientist or something, correct me, but as far as I know, like certain drugs like psilocybin, they can create new neurological connections, but that doesn't actually make you grow new brain tissue.
I'm pretty sure there's some stuff that actually does grow new brain cells, specifically like lion's mane and CBD oil helps neurogenesis, which is actually like the growth of new brain cells. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, I'll look at that later. But again, I just still don't see the justification here. Again, how do you really know that this new technology won't come in the next 20 years when you're like, I don't know, 50, 60 or something, rather than like you have to extend your life by 2 or 3 years for this new technology to come out. And by then, would you be able to afford it? Would you be able to know about it?
See, that's the thing. It's like nobody knows when the technology is going to come.
Well, right. There's a huge, like, since there's no guarantee for this, like, I mean, would you kill somebody, like another human being, if you knew that you could live forever and that person was going to die in the next few years? Is that justified? So
if killing this human being, like, actually, like, if for hypothetically I knew that I was going to live forever by doing this,
yeah,
that's a very unrealistic hypothetical scenario that could never happen. But if this person, like, you're also saying I knew this person would also die eventually anyways?
yeah. Let's say
in just a few years?
Yeah, let's say you had some magic ball.
Mm-hmm.
Would you kill them?
I think that would be. That's
because
yes.
this gets in, because it is a weird moral gray area where are you so important that you get to be basically the god of existence? Like, do you get to decide how people die and whether you deserve to live forever? I mean,
my perspective is that, like, I would never do anything like that in real life because it's a weird hypothetical you brought up there that would never happen, and I'm always factoring in a hypothetical God that might judge me for doing something like that. So I would never do anything like that because I'm like, oh wait, maybe there's this hypothetical God that would judge me for doing stuff like that. So I would never do that.
Right. So even if you were to know the actual outcome, you still wouldn't do it. Like, you know for sure, you have a magic crystal ball. You knew if you killed this person, you'd be able to live forever, but this person would die in the next few years. You still wouldn't do it. So this is a situation where you don't know the outcome. You don't know if you'll ever live long enough to see this technology, if it'll ever come into existence, if it will happen in the next 10, 20 years. And you're not even sure if fish will actually help you live longer. But there's so many unknowns here, but you're willing to cause the suffering and death of these animals. So I just don't see the.
Well, like, so, like, the difference of the life form of a fish, it's so less.
I understand.
Than humans, so.
I understand, but you're talking about killing, like, presumably thousands of fish over your entire lifetime. Like, sure, I'll agree that fish don't have the capacity to experience well-being, but I mean, when you're capturing these fish, when they're submerged below, like below sea level, the pressure difference when you haul them up, it makes their eyes pop out of their head, and like their eyes can literally explode, and then they suffocate to death. A lot of them are like gutted open while they're still conscious and alive. Would you rather experience that like literally hundreds or thousands of times? Or would you rather be a human and just die once, like a relatively peaceful death? Like, I don't know. how I don't know how most people, I guess heart disease is how most people die, like a heart attack. Like, would you rather experience a heart attack than have your eyes get like burst out of your head, suffocate to death, or like have somebody gut you alive and you slowly die from just having your organs peeled out of you?
Well, you can't like compare like the death of a human to the death of a fish, because like, you know,
I'm not saying the fish's life is equal to a human, but I'm saying the method in which you're killing is way, way fucking worse, and you're doing it hundreds, if not thousands of times over your lifetime. And this is all for this idea that maybe fish will help me live forever, but I'm not sure. I'm not actually sure if fish are really healthy or not. And maybe I'll have to live this certain amount of time to like live far enough into the future so this technology exists. Like, you're causing like horrible suffering and death to these animals when you literally don't know the outcome of anything.
Yeah, it is based on it's like a wager. I'm like making a wager that eating some fish is going to increase my lifespan, and without that, I can't really justify it. But it's like, yeah, it's just the very possibility. And then this study, the Seventh-day Adventists that ate fish, the pescatarians, they're living longer than the vegans. So that is
You're
enough.
talking about 2 to 3 years, and they have higher rates of chronic disease as well.
Yeah, that's an issue. I wonder, like, if there's also like, what about insects? Maybe fish isn't ideal. Maybe I would want to switch to insects eventually. Just a different.
By the way, the vegan women in the study, they massively brought down the average for whatever reason. The vegan women did pretty poorly. They had higher rates of heart disease than the meat eaters, I believe. So that's another aspect that you should take into consideration. Again, this all points towards, okay, well, we have this data set where clearly plant-based diets are ideal for human consumption. And among those people on the plant-based diet, okay, well, in this period of time, the fish eaters did slightly better, but it, like, based on mechanistic evidence as well, it really looks like this is just odd population trends that were brought about by numerous confounding factors. There really isn't any evidence here that fish helps you live longer.
Do we have studies on insects? What about insects?
I don't know of any studies on insects, but I do know that some are high in saturated fat. I don't think crickets are, but this actually does affect aging too. There's this thing called mammalian target of rapamycin. Leucine, isoleucine, and valine in particular accelerate this pathway that does accelerate aging. Methionine, which also tends to be high in animal products. The only, like, fish is the highest actually in methionine next to egg whites, but compared to whole eggs, fish is more dense in methionine. Methionine is a sulfur-containing amino acid, causes inflammation, and it also has been shown to accelerate aging. So again, protein sources of animal origins don't seem to be particularly good at increasing life expectancy. Based on mechanistic evidence, like accelerating the mammalian target of rapamycin, how fast your cells turn over and die. And again, methionine causing DNA damage, inflammation, accelerating aging. There was also a huge, massive study recently, over 400,000 participants. Plant-based sources of protein were associated with increase in, low risk of death than animal sources of protein. So
yeah, I have heard the whole methionine thing. People do methionine restriction for longevity, which is why even fish, I don't want to overdo fish in my diet. It is something I even restrict myself because I'm worried about too much methionine in my diet for longevity. Which is why I like things that are like animal foods, but they're also low in protein, such as butter and cream, like raw cream, which you would also say is bad for you just because it has cholesterol.
Yeah, saturated fat and cholesterol, that'll clog your arteries.
Which I am skeptical of that. Are you familiar with the whole network of cholesterol skeptics, the Think organization?
Oh my!
The International Network of Cholesterol Skeptics. You think that there's a bunch of they're just all wrong?
I've heard every single fucking argument for why these people think saturated fat and cholesterol doesn't increased risk of heart disease, and it's all bullshit. They fall under two basic categories. On the one hand, they'll claim that dietary saturated fat and cholesterol doesn't raise serum cholesterol, which is being completely debunked. Again, there's two massive meta-analyses with hundreds of metabolic ward experiments proving that. And secondly, they'll claim that serum cholesterol, there's the other group where they'll claim serum cholesterol doesn't increase risk of heart disease. And what they'll do there is cherry pick certain population studies, like elderly populations, who just get sick and then they have lower cholesterol, like the reverse causation effect I've mentioned before. And they'll just cherry pick data too. And then there's a third category technically. Peter Attia is most well known for this. I think he was actually a medical doctor at one point, but he quit. He claims, he's one of those people who claim it's not LDL-C that's harmful, the actual cholesterol molecules. It's the LDL-P, the actual particles themselves. And his argument there is if you look at research on diabetics, LDL-P is a better predictor of heart disease than LDL-C. But it's just because insulin resistance changes your lipid profile in a way where there's a discordance between your LDL-P and LDL-C. For a normal population, LDL-C is the best biomarker for heart disease risk. So there's two basic categories, and there's the weird odd one that Peter Attia falls in, where he'll cherry pick just particular lipoproteins and say, oh, this is the one. And there's people who will say, no, it's VLDL. It's all nonsense, basically.
I have to give you credit. You're really good at like memorizing all this information. So your brain, can't be that deficient yet. But
yeah.
Who knows how long it will last though? Because I think a lot of these ex-vegans, they last a long time. And then I'm saying like eventually though, you might hit a wall. It could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, it could be 30 years. And me trying to live forever, if we're trying to live forever, then we have to think like in hundreds of year time spans. Who's to say we could be a vegan for 300 years straight, 500 years,
tell me
1,000 years.
Tell me what the issue here is being vegan long-term for several decades or longer.
Well, I guess it's just
what are the issues with nutrients?
Okay, so the deficiencies, I think, well, a lot of the stuff, like it would be B12, but you supplement with that, so that's not really a problem if you supplement. I guess it would be K2, which I would want to ask you, like, do you ever recommend to your audience to eat vitamin K2? Because this is one of the huge deficiencies in the vegan diet.
No, it's not. Again, it's virtually impossible for an adult human to be vitamin K deficient. You only see it in people, in like infants, essentially, who haven't built up their gut microbiome, and people who've been on a very, very heavy course of antibiotics. K2 is produced in your gut by your bacteria. So the only way to actually induce a vitamin K deficiency is by a heavy, heavy course of antibiotics. Otherwise, it's incredibly fucking rare. And I challenge you to find any research at all that shows that vegans have a higher prevalence of vitamin K deficiency.
Mm-hmm. I can't show you any research, I guess, but I would just say
I've heard these arguments.
There is some good evidence we could use to suggest that K2 deficiency is a real thing, because you have all these ex-vegans, and then when they do eat some like grass-fed butter, some raw milk, they're symptoms of like vitamin K2 deficiency, which would be teeth problems. A lot of vegans run into teeth problems, and that's a classic symptom of vitamin K2 deficiency. And then they start eating some more grass-fed butter with these fat-soluble vitamins and K2, which help absorb more minerals into the blood, and then all of a sudden their teeth problems are going away. Their dental health is better. They're it's like there's so much. It would seem to suggest that they were K2 deficient just by the very nature of when they do eat these foods. It helps their health and it benefits their health in so many ways. And then there's like Weston A. Price. Are you familiar with Weston A. Price?
Oh, God, I am very familiar with them.
Well, you can't deny that, like, people who ate a lot of these animal fats, they had better dental health. And you see that these long-term vegans, I've seen so many testimonials where it's like their dental health is so bad as a vegan. They're getting all these cavities. And as soon as they eat some grass-fed butter, their dental health is just like so much better.
Okay.
What the heck is that?
Weston A. Price, the actual Weston A. Price, he was a dentist, right? If I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, he was a dentist.
So his work had less to do with cavities and more like, as far as I'm aware, it had less to do with cavities and more to do with the overall dental structure. He found that there was a higher rate of like impacted teeth and misalignment of teeth with among cultures that consumed grains like corn compared to, you know, the Inuit or whatever that ate raw meat or what and shit like that. Now this can be explained. I mean, look, if you're eating a lot of like really acidic fruits, especially sticky dried fruits like dates, it wouldn't surprise me that you have higher rates of cavities. As far as like the overall literature, there isn't really much. There isn't anything to suggest that vegans have higher rates of cavities. I haven't seen any. And K2 specifically, like the highest source of K2 is natto.
Yeah,
Everything else, like, I mean, why would you eat something like grass-fed butter or beef liver or something like that when you could eat natto, which doesn't have any saturated fat, cholesterol?
yeah, I agree that if you're eating natto, the animal sources of K2 are you don't need them. But do you eat natto?
No, I don't personally. There is actually a health food store near me that has it, so I might try it.
And you don't supplement with K2. So basically, you're trusting that you're producing enough K2 in your own gut.
Okay, so you don't really need K2. If you actually look at the research, like on bone health, you can just eat vitamin K from green vegetables. K2, now there's new research that's kind of conflicting here with K2. Now, K2 stays in circulation longer in your bloodstream because it's not filtered out by the liver or your kidneys. But K2 binds to a particular protein that carries calcium, and there is an association with high vitamin K2 intake and reduced risk of calcification of your arteries. Now, the research is mixed. The only positive research has come out of, what was it? The Netherlands, I think.
Wait, so
But
this research is saying that K2 consumption increases your chance of getting heart disease?
no, the research is mixed. So the mechanistic like laboratory data shows that K2 would likely reduce risk of artery calcification, which is a good thing because
Yeah.
it stays in your bloodstream for longer and it binds to specific proteins that carry calcium. So it basically takes calcium out of your blood. The research on K2 consumption is mixed. The only positive findings have come out of the Netherlands, I believe, where K2 consumption is associated with lower risk of artery calcification. However, in Germany, K2 consumption is associated with higher risk of heart disease. And the reason for that is probably just because of saturated fat and cholesterol and just the general overall diet lifestyle of these different populations where you might see just conflicting results. So what this suggests to me is K2 probably likely has a benefit, but the sources of K2 matter. So natto would be the most ideal source.
And in Japan, which is the longest living culture, they're eating a lot of natto. They're getting a lot of K2.
Right, and that might play into it. So again, like, why would you eat butter and stuff when you can get natto?
And even the second longest living cultures, the Iceland, right? They're getting K2 from their cheese. From their cheese, they're getting K2.
Iceland?
Yeah, because they're eating a lot of cheese. Let's see.
I wouldn't attribute that to cheese intake.
Iceland and Switzerland are right below Japan for longevity. So why? I mean, that could be because of the cheese they're eating, right?
You know, it's very difficult to isolate one particular food. Like, do vegans have a lower rate of chronic disease because they eat more beans? Like, I wouldn't really rely on isolating one particular food or food group. I'd say it's more to do with their overall diet and lifestyle. And again, when you see lower rates of chronic disease among populations that are eating plant-based diets. The Adventist vegetarians, highest life expectancy, lowest rate of chronic disease. Japan historically has had like the lowest rates of heart disease as well, but it's changing. They're eating more animal products now.
Mm-hmm.
So, in these populations like Iceland, maybe K2 intake is a big factor here for their lower rates of heart disease or longer life expectancy or something. But again, if it is that, then like if you know what nutrient it is, then why wouldn't you just take the better source of that nutrient, like natto?
Yeah, I guess it would be. I'm hypothesizing there could be something else in animal foods, animal fats that we need. Even this might not be much of an argument to you or the audience, but I mean, I even consider the fact of unknown, undiscovered nutrients that might be in these animal foods. Like maybe, science is always changing. We're always learning new stuff. Maybe in 50 years, we'll discover, oh, guess what? Oh, guess what? There was something else in animal fats that you actually needed. Like we don't know what science is going to discover in the future.
With mass spectrometers, I highly, highly doubt that. Like, I think we've figured out like all the nutrients that are in foods, how they interact with each other, their effects on the human body. It's not all known, but I'm pretty sure we know all the actual nutrients.
We might. We don't. I mean, I guess it is hypothetical. I guess one thing that could be contributing to the longevity of Japan and those Iceland, it could be like the iodine as well, right? Because there's a lot of iodine in Japanese foods because they're getting
sea vegetables, yeah.
And then even in Iceland, they'd be getting all that dairy, and dairy is high in iodine. Are you getting enough iodine? Do you eat like seaweed and stuff?
I was taking a iodine supplement for a while, but then I just switched to eating more sea vegetables. I just don't like having to make nori wraps, so I just like put it up into a square sometimes and eat it. But the reason iodine is in dairy products is actually because of the cleaning chemicals they use in the industry.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm dead serious. The big vats that they contain dairy in, the cleaning chemical they use, it has iodine, and then
because iodine is a disinfectant.
Yeah,
that's true. Okay.
So that's where that's coming from.
Ooh, that's not good. Well, then I'm probably not getting iodine from my dairy because it's from small farms, and they're not probably.
Yeah, probably not. It would be very low.
Mm-hmm. So the other nutrient I'm concerned with as far as being a vegan is carnosine. I'm sure you've heard other people talk about carnosine. Okay. There is some research showing that carnosine is really good for life extension purposes. And vegans are shown to be much more deficient in this carnosine amino acid. And people say it's a non-essential amino acid, yet at the same time, the research is showing that this could really extend lifespan. It has extended lifespan of fruit flies in a study. And I can show you that.
Okay, I'm guessing all of this involves carnosine supplementation.
Well, yeah, people do supplement with it, and maybe
right in the research.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why wouldn't you just take a carnosine supplement if that was a concern for you?
Well, you could. I guess that's just one of these things where it's like, yeah, modern day supplements is making it easier to be a vegan, but
well, here's the thing. Let's just say for the sake of argument, there are like amino acids or individual nutrients in animal products that you can't get from plant sources that have health benefits. The thing is, like, you're not just eating carnosine when you eat meat. You're also eating things like saturated fat, cholesterol that you don't want, maybe heme iron, things like that. So yeah, there are definitely benefits to consuming supplements. I've also seen Sean Baker make these same sort of claims where he was saying, it doesn't matter that my testosterone levels are so low because apparently carnitine increases testosterone receptor sites or something. So even though he has low testosterone, it's like the same as having normal testosterone. Well, the research he's referencing, it's all conducted on supplements. So, like, are you really going to tell me that this proves that meat, like just actual meat, is going to have this benefit when all of this research is being done on supplements?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's pros and cons with everything. Like I'm getting at least because I'm not supplementing with carnosine because it is an expensive supplement.
Is it an
I guess
expensive supplement?
I think it is.
Let me just look on Amazon real quick.
I mean, it's more expensive. It would probably be more. I'd probably get more carnosine in just eating some sardines than I'm gonna get from supplementing it.
I highly doubt that. No, you'd probably get more from a supplement. The thing is, you can buy raw materials. So you could probably just find some sort of company that would sell it to you in bulk, like in a massive bag. It might cost like $200 or $300, but like that's an amount that would last you for like 10 years. So like I'm looking on Amazon real quick here. 180 count, 500 milligram capsules, and they say a serving size is 1,000 milligrams. So 1 gram of carnosine. It's $30. You could probably just buy it in bulk and get a massive bag.
And then there's creatine. That's the same kind of situation with carnosine. And it's like, you see how like the list goes on, and then there's like, eventually to be a vegan and to do it ideally, you need to be supplementing with all these different supplements.
No. Like again, creatine isn't really an essential nutrient. There is, listen, there is research showing that I think vegetarians who took a creatine supplement, they had a boost in cognitive function. Now, the meat eaters who took the creatine supplement, they had no benefit. But after the vegetarians took the creatine supplement, they got ahead of the meat eaters. So what that suggests is your body actually becomes less sensitive to creatine once you've adapted to eating it all the time. So again, I think this pretty much shows that supplementation is probably preferred, and doing it sort of infrequently, like maybe go on it for a bit, go off it for a bit. And again, you're not just getting creatine from eating meat. It's all the other bad things you don't want, like saturated fat and cholesterol. And look, being healthy is hard, and I personally don't think it matters that you supplement creatine or carnitine or whatever. But like being healthy is hard to begin with. So like, I just don't see the issue of taking like an extra supplement if you really think it's going to help you.
Well, being healthy seems much harder on the vegan diet because you have to supplement. To do it right, you have to supplement with all this stuff you're saying. You have to supplement with algae oil, B12.
So so for supplements, I take B12 and algae-based DHA. That's practically nothing. Most people take a multivitamin. My supplement stack isn't really all that different from an average person's. You can look at a lot of bodybuilders. Just go on YouTube and just search my supplement stack bodybuilding. Like they're taking creatine, a protein supplement, multivitamins. Like my supplement regimen isn't that extreme. And by the way,
I mean, I actually,
like the supplement regimen that all these vegans are taking in like the Adventist mortality studies, it's not much different than what I'm doing. If they're supplementing at all, and they still have great health outcomes.
Yeah, I'm not about to judge you for supplementing because I'd be such a hypocrite. I supplement like probably 10 times more things than you do.
Yeah.
And
what do you supplement?
Oh gosh, a lot of things, but CBD oil to help my brain. It's anti-inflammatory for the brain. NAC, which is amino acid that helps your liver produce more glutathione.
Where do you get your CBD oil? Do you have like a prescription or anything for it?
No, I'm actually trying to make like a supplement company like selling it even, but I get it in bulk supply. I'm getting like a bulk supply of it, and then I'm kind of repackaging it and stuff.
Yeah, because like Canada's kind of legalizing marijuana here, but concentrations and extracts, they're still illegal. So you actually need a prescription for real CBD oil.
Oh, really?
You can get hemp oil, but it doesn't have the active cannabinoids. You actually need a prescription to be able to get it, and it's total bullshit. Like, is that how it works in the States?
Yeah, you have to. No, it's like legal in the States, I think. CBD, because it's no THC, so it's just CBD.
Yeah. Okay, so that's weird. Okay.
Yeah, there's tons of companies over here just selling it legal. You can get it in the health food store. No prescription required. Just go to the health food store, you get it.
Like, it's just CBD. Like, there's no THC, so I don't know why it's even
There's like
restricted.
there's microscopic amounts of THC. It's ridiculous.
That's dumb.
I guess the other thing that I see a lot of vegans run into is actually problems that you have yourself, which is, we should talk about this, which is gut problems, gas, bloating. I saw your video where you talked about, you have a lot of extreme gut related issues, and then depression. I've seen a lot of ex-vegan testimonials, and they seem to, these two problems that you have yourself seem to be very common problems amongst vegans. And I even had a study showing that vegans are more likely to suffer from depression. And I'm thinking that this could be because some kind of deficiency from the animal fats, even maybe low cholesterol, because low cholesterol is associated with depression.
I think the low cholesterol is a reverse causation effect. I think people with depression, there's a bunch of confounding variables in their lifestyle factors that end up lowering their cholesterol. But I will agree that low fat diets, just in general, are associated with depression quite often. That could be for a number of reasons. Like, I know you do need some amount of fat to properly absorb certain vitamins. It is important for gut health. Like, there are certain bacteria in your gut where plant-based oils actually act they're antimicrobial, so they kill off some of the bad gut bacteria. So you do need some fat in your diet. I would say I would agree with you there. There is an association, and some of the depression you see with vegans can be attributed to a very low fat diet. There was a guy, Homegrown Big, that I did a video on. I think he mentioned that he wasn't feeling too well, like he was kind of down and depressed. He was following a raw vegan diet that was really low in fat. So the thing, though, too, like, I've been suffering from depression my entire life. Like, I was suicidal at 6 years old. So this isn't anything new for me. And veganism actually helped it. And there is some research showing that high antioxidant diets do help with depression. So kind of makes sense that veganism would kind of help me.
And what about the gut problems? What do you attribute your gut problems to? It's just all that fiber? You're just eating lots of excess fiber and stuff?
No, I don't think it was that. So I did take a probiotic supplement that made me bleed out of my ass super hard. I don't know what the fuck, how the fuck that happened, but I stopped taking that. So what I ended up doing was cutting out the protein supplement I was taking. I do tend to have a weird reaction to protein powders, so I cut that out. Just started eating a really, really high fruit diet, and just eating more like flax seeds, hemp seeds, chia seeds. And now my digestion's a lot better, and so is my depression. I still have weird ups and downs here and there, but it's steadily improving, and you can kind of see in my videos, like, I've just been uploading more. I have more energy. So, like, my digestion's better too. I'm not farting constantly. Like, I think I fart like a normal person now after I made those changes.
Are you lactose intolerant? I'm curious.
I don't think I'm lactose intolerant, but I do think I have this gene where if I eat dairy, it makes me really susceptible to constipation. I remember when I was a kid, especially, my parents made me drink so much milk because, they had this idea, like, milk, big, strong bones, grow tall, horseshit like that. I had really bad constipation when I was a kid. I'd go like a week or more without taking a shit.
I did too, actually. Yeah. That was one of the biggest problems I had as a kid.
That's actually a pretty common issue, and I think it's caused by dairy. I think a lot of people have that issue.
I think it's also caused by gluten as well. I think that's a big...
Maybe.
But have you ever tried raw milk? Because I would challenge you to try drinking a glass of raw milk. Because
at this point, there's no way I'm going to do it. Just for ethical reasons.
That could literally... But what's the ethical concern, though, if you're visiting the cow and it's this cow is being treated very nicely, Because if you were just to eat some raw milk for like a week, like a glass a day for a week, you'd probably solve a lot of your gut issues. You might even solve I bet you would solve your depression. It's very powerful for this stuff. It's way powerful than these stupid probiotics you are taking that make you bleed and stuff. Raw milk heals so many illnesses. It's been shown, like so many people, so many testimonials.
Okay. That's a rather dubious claim, but I'll tell you why I just wouldn't drink milk. Even if you could convince me of the health benefits, I just wouldn't do it. For one thing, I don't think my life is that valuable where I'd like sacrifice an animal or exploit it just for my own personal benefit. Now, there's practical issues with the dairy industry. Like, look, you have to keep a cow pregnant in order for it to produce milk. And you could argue that, okay, on an Amish farm that'll give you raw milk or whatever, it's not a factory farming situation. Okay, well, they'll let this cow grow up or whatever. Look, they're still going to fucking kill it. I actually know around this area, there are Amish farmers in Guelph. They're fucking assholes. They treat their animals like fucking shit. Just because something's grass-fed and free-range doesn't mean pieces of shit aren't treating these animals are treating these animals well. So just that alone would stop me from doing it. Also, I have a different idea on exploitation. Now, like, even assuming like the cow's baby isn't going to be murdered and it could, like, the cow's baby would grow up and like die of old age. Like, we could even have a hypothetical scenario like that.
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of using an animal and just having its existence, like bringing it into existence just to serve me. It's sort of like if this were the Matrix and you had no idea that just a second, you had no idea that you were actually in the Matrix and you were just living a normal life, but it turns out that you're being used by a machine. Your entire life is a sham. It's just an illusion. You thought you were living a free existence. You thought you were living a normal life, but it turns out you're just like a brain in a vat and you're being used to power a machine. That's kind of the level of exploitation that I see with humane farming. Like, I mean, the absolute best farming practices that you could fantasize about. That's the comparison I'm making. Sure, the cow might not realize at that point in time that it's being used, that its existence is just for your own benefit. But I just don't like that idea ethically.
Well, you have a dog. How is that? How's that any different than like a cow being raised as a pet? A pet. Okay.
Well, they're rescued, and I'm not using the dog to produce milk or, having it breed.
But you're using it for emotional comfort. What if you were to rescue a cow?
I'm not.
You're not? Your dog doesn't give you emotional comfort at all?
No.
Just like friendship?
No.
Companionship?
Now, Jasmine, she's actually the one, my wife, who has the idea of getting these animals. That might be the case for her, but really, if the animals weren't benefiting from her getting them, she wouldn't do it. The only reason she gets these animals is because she feels bad for them. We rescued Finn, we rescued the rabbits, we rescued the mice we have. We didn't go to a pet shop or anything. The reason ultimately we got these animals is for their benefit, not for ours. And we've had quite a lot of misfortunes because of these animals. Like, oh my God, especially our dog Lucy. Holy shit, the amount of money she fucking cost us, like, it's tremendous. But
here's a hypothetical question, because I want to know where you're coming from. Like, let's say you discovered hypothetically that eating some eggs every week and eating a glass of raw milk a week or something would extend your life by like 10 years. That's a lot. Would you do it at that point? If you can gain an extra 10 years just by eating a little bit of, dairy and eggs, you wouldn't even have to kill an animal. They were like the most ethically sustainable raised animals. That's a long time extra to live. Would you do it for that?
Me personally, no, I wouldn't eat animal products to live another 10 years. Now, if that were actually the case, I'd say, like, okay, well, I'd admit it if that were actually true, like according to the research, but it would just mean I wouldn't really necessarily focus on health for an argument for veganism. I'd focus more on the ethical principles. But yeah, for me personally, but if that were the case, like it wouldn't be as strong of a health wouldn't really be a strong argument for veganism.
Yeah.
There are some practical realities that make veganism a bit difficult. For instance, in the third world, like in Thailand and shit, farming like cattle is a way out of poverty for a lot of these people. That's not a good argument for veganism. Like for poor farmers that are farming rice traditionally, farming cattle will bring them out of poverty. That's just a practical reality, but I'm not really going to use economic reasons like that to argue for veganism. I'm just going to be honest and say, that's a downside, but there's all these other benefits.
See, that to me is showing a level of extremism. But you'd think this is good, but like you would undermine your own health just for the sake of animals. And to me, that's like undervaluing your own life and your own existence. Because I could never see me doing that. I could never see me undermining my own health for the sake of, the life of an animal.
I don't think 10 years of my life is worth hundreds, if not thousands of animals dying over the course of my lifetime. I don't think I'm that valuable. Now, again, if that were the case, I wouldn't really be arguing for veganism from a health perspective, but luckily that isn't the case.
Okay,
and by the way, I wouldn't really call that extremism. I mean, there's people who, what is it called? There were nurses and just aid workers who went to Africa to help with the Ebola epidemic recently. Like they put themselves at huge risk for contracting Ebola. There are soldiers and shit that like genuinely believe, like especially World War II. Now it's like completely fucked. But I mean, there are people who willingly enlisted in the military because they thought they were doing the right thing. They'd put their lives at risk. Like just because people are willing to put their lives at risk for like a higher cause doesn't mean they're crazy or extremists. I mean, I just think it means they're good people.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe extremism isn't the right word. It's more like self-sacrificial, right? Yeah. Altruistic in a way towards animals. Let's take, for example, though, let's say someone who's suffering from a health problem. Let's say Casey, for example, vegetable police. You know him. He's eating meat for the sake of his own health because he has this like health problem. Isn't someone like him at the very least, someone who's this suffering from this health problem, isn't someone like him justified and ethically for exploring all the options? And he feels like he's pushed up against a wall now where he has to eat meat or his health problems are going to be worse and he's never going to heal himself. Someone like him at least is justified, right? Wouldn't you say?
Okay, well, Casey is an absolute fucking moron. Let's get that straight. The guy drank turpentine because he saw on some forum that it's good. For those of you who don't know, turpentine is essentially paint thinner. It's like a tree sap that is being refined in a way, and they used to use it for like peeling paint off of shit. So he drank that because he heard on some forum it was a good idea, and he felt terrible after. It actually put him into a fucking depression. He had no energy and shit. So he's done a lot of really dumb fucking shit with his diet, and it's no wonder that it led to some health problems down the road. I wouldn't really attribute his health problems to veganism. Secondly, what probably is the case with Casey, he either has parasites, fungal growth in his intestine, which is very common. I think it's like Candida is the most common type of like infection in humans, or he has a bacterial overgrowth in his small intestine. There really shouldn't be any bacteria in your small intestine. All of these things can cause your body not to break down certain irritating compounds like oxalates, salicylates. If you're not breaking down those compounds, then they can cause some like really bad histamine reactions. Like I know he talked about itchy skin, acne, can cause depression, anger, anxiety. So what really the problem is here is he has to either take anti-parasitic medication, antifungal medication, or a certain type of antibiotic. There's a type of antibiotic that deals with bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine. It's not absorbed, so there's no risk of it like causing other issues. You can get bad reactions from antibiotics. So like that would have solved the issue. Maybe temporarily he'd want to go on a low oxalate salicylate diet and then reintroduce food slowly. But rather than doing that, he just decided to eat animal products. Now, what's happening here is eating nothing but beef is masking the symptoms. So he's not eating oxalates, salicylates, these high histamine foods that are causing these reactions. So he's not getting the symptoms, but the underlying problem is still there. He's still going to have like bacterial overgrowth, fungal infection, parasitic infection. So that's what's going on there.
Yeah, and you probably say that like a similar thing is going on with Jordan B. Peterson and his daughter Michaela Peterson, who've been on the carnivore diet.
It's very likely. Also, I don't think people really appreciate how much antidepressants can fuck you up. Now, before, antidepressants were thought of as drugs that restore a chemical balance in your brain. They don't do that. What they do is they fuck up your brain chemistry, and sometimes they can make it seem like, oh, it helped the depression. Well, it didn't. It's just like taking any other drug. Well, I could take heroin and feel fucking great. I won't be depressed if I'm high on heroin, but that's not actually treating my depression. And these drugs can do really weird things. They can make you fucking delusional, make you numb to everything. And I think that's kind of what happened to Jordan Peterson and Michaela. From the sounds of it, they were both taking really high doses of antidepressant medications. It ended up getting to a tipping point where the negative effects of the medications outweighed the benefits. They went off, and maybe they do have some sort of food sensitivities or bacterial overgrowth, and just these factors combined made them think, okay, it must be the meat. When it's probably not. They probably have some sort of weird digestive issue that might relate to like bacterial overgrowth, fungal infection that they should really look into. I will agree, maybe some people do have just weird allergic reactions to certain foods. Like, hey, maybe broccoli does trigger something for her, but eating an all-meat diet definitely isn't the best way to go about dealing with this.
Yeah, I agree that there's other ways they should have looked into healing their gut more.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things people can do.
Well, and I
don't think in the long term eating like a 100% meat diet at all is a good thing. So I agree.
Yeah, and I mean they're eating like a lot of beef and shit too. Like what you would agree isn't like even good meat. So I think they're just managing their symptoms rather than the underlying cause of these issues.
Mm-hmm. And so another thing is, I would say a lot of people as a vegan, they end up being more sensitive to chemicals. And I wonder if you have any experience with that. Have you felt more sensitive to chemicals since being a strict vegan? Because a lot of people, like for instance, they report they're more sensitive to air fresheners and perfumes. And what do you think about that?
I haven't had anything like that personally.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe it's possible. Like your body does kind of develop a tolerance to certain irritants. So like, maybe there's something in meat that was irritating them in a similar way as some sort of chemical. And now that that's gone, they don't have that tolerance anymore. Or maybe they're just noticing it now when before they didn't, because there were other things that were kind of bothering them. I don't know.
So I just want to ask your opinion on, like, let's say there's just all these ex testimonials. Do you ever investigate those ex vegan testimonials? Do you ever like watch these people? And it's not a study, it's not as proof as a study, but it's a certain type of evidence that, don't you think we should look at all these ex vegans, and that counts for something? Do you ever investigate the other side of all these people who have tried the vegan diet and they've just totally massively failed, and they run into all these health problems, neurological conditions, depression, gut problems, muscle loss? And what do you think about these people, these massive amounts of ex-vegans? There's a big turnover rate, right? A lot of vegans are leaving the vegan movement because of health problems. why are these health problems occurring? What's the biggest thing they're doing wrong, you think?
Well, now a lot of people get into veganism for odd reasons, especially when you look at like Sverage's channel. I'm sure you've seen the vegan
Yeah.
interviews there.
Yeah.
Most of these people had health problems before they went vegan, and they're kind of looking a way to solve these issues. Most of them relating to gut health, but some like depression, anxiety, weird things. Um, so though that type of individual, I think, is susceptible to listening to just bad fringe information because like mainstream information has kind of failed them. So they were eating like maybe a paleo diet before they still had these issues. And then they kind of go to the next extreme where there's some dude talking about the raw vegan diet where you eat just fruits and you have to go on like a fruit cleanse for a month. So I think a lot of those people fall into those categories. Some of them might be following a little more normal diets, but again, a lot of these things can be explained away by them just not plain eating enough. Maybe their macronutrient balance was just off just enough for them to still have these issues, like not eating enough fat. And that can be a problem. Like I wasn't eating enough fat for quite a while when I was vegan, just because, like it's a little bit you have to kind of go a bit out of your way. I'm not like the type of person to just snack on nuts. So I just had to add like seeds and shit to my oatmeal, and then I was fine. So I think generally that's most of the issues you're seeing. And then some of those people might also fall under the category that Casey falls under, where they probably just have like bacterial overgrowth, fungal infection, or parasitic infection that they've had for a long time, but they just didn't know how to deal with it, or that they even had it, and they don't know like what tests to get and shit like that.
Yeah, that's probably very true. And yeah, I can't really argue with that. I mean, all vegan diets are not created equal, and maybe they're not even supplementing like the way you'd think they should be supplementing with this algae-based DHA, which can make a huge difference.
Oh, by the way, women in particular, they might have an especially bad problem because recently they found birth control pills. They do affect metabolism of B vitamins and folate. So that's another thing. There's odd things that you wouldn't kind of suspect, but like birth control might be messing them up. So
Yeah. As far as this algae-based DHA and it has EPA too, I wanted to ask you about, is this supplement really, you think this is equivalent to someone taking a fish oil? It's just as good? Is it lacking in anything that say I would get from a sardine?
No, I'd say it's better. So fish actually don't break down ALA into DHA and EPA. They actually get the EPA and DHA in their body from algae. So basically, you're taking out the middleman and getting the fat where the fish get it. And that has the benefit of getting rid of the issue of biomagnification, like fish, like especially after the whole nuclear incident in Japan. Like you're not getting weird radioactive compounds and mercury and endocrine disrupting pollutants. You're just getting algae. And they're like, they tend to be a little bit more expensive, but I think that's mostly just due to economy of scale. They're not as common as fish oil supplements, but you can find some pretty decent deals on Amazon. Generally, the algae-based DHA supplements, the really cheap ones that you can get for like 10 or 15 bucks a bottle, they tend to be dosed fairly low. I think they have like 100 milligrams total of like EPA and DHA. The one I get is a little more expensive. I think I paid $23 for the bottle, but it's dosed appropriately. I think the total dose is like 260 milligrams per capsule. So, yeah.
Are you familiar that with this DHA, when it's in a phospholipid form, is more bioavailable in your brain? And this is why they say krill oil is so good, because it's like way more in a phospholipid form that gets into the brain better. And this would be in fish eggs. Dr. Rhonda Patrick talks about this. So I was wondering if algae-based DHA, if it's in a phospholipid form that's highly absorbed into the brain versus an unphospholipid form. Are you familiar with that?
I have no idea. I've honestly never heard of that. I'd have to look into it. again, I'd weigh out the pros and cons, even if this was true. Would you prefer to run the risk of exposing yourself to more environmental pollutants rather than just taking a higher dose of the supplements and maybe spending a bit more money? And
Yeah, well,
ethical reasons too.
I think it would be wise also to consider that humans have never gotten our DHA from like algae in the past. We've always got it from a marine animal who has consumed the algae, and maybe they have done some conversion. Maybe these animals have done some conversion that makes this DHA more usable when we get it from like a krill or a fish or something, rather than just the plant itself.
It's possible, but there's also issues with that. So algae, all forms of algae, it creates a toxin that's both neurotoxic and liver toxic. Now, that's not really a problem if you're just eating algae, but when you're eating fish, it can be a problem. So I'm sure you've heard of ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a neurological disease.
Yes. Yeah.
It increases from fish consumption because of biomagnification. The fish are eating algae that produce this toxin, and that toxin becomes biomagnified in the fish. There's actually a population, there's this group of people living on an island. I can't remember what they were called, but they ate bats. And they had by far like way, way higher rates of ALS than any population on the planet. Turns out these bats are eating like this other creature that eats fish, and the amount of this toxin is so biomagnified in these bats that by the time you eat it, it massively increases your risk of getting like this neurological disease. So again, I wouldn't say fish is the best source of getting DHA. I'd say your best bet is really just taking the algae-based DHA supplement, even if supposedly it's not in a phospholipid form. I'd have to look into that because a lot of these things also rely on like initial absorption rates and shit like that. It might not actually be all that significant a difference. I do know vegans aren't, they don't lack as much DHA as you'd suspect. So there is also evidence that your body kind of alters its metabolism to be more efficient at converting ALA to DHA, and it might absorb it better.
It sounds like you watch. It sounds like you watch Mike the Vegan's video on the toxicity with the bats thing. He has a video about that caused the ALS.
I didn't see Mike's video, but I saw Dr. Michael Greger's video on that.
Oh, okay, because they had a very similar. They laid out the same case. So we talked about like fish. Is there any lower level of life form where you think there'd be just no ethical problem? Let's say like it's a clam or even a little krill. Are you worried about the life of a little krill or an ant? I mean, is there any level where the life form, is there any threshold where it's like, okay, fine, that's low enough where it's like, that's not an issue. It's a little tiny insect. You're not going to judge people for eating an ant. Is there anything like that?
Well, here's the thing. It's a quote from my favorite manga, Berserk. If you're worried about stepping on ants, you won't be able to walk. Now,
wait. You were breaking up there. Say that again.
I said, if you're worried about stepping on ants, you won't be able to walk. So, like, look, if I'm on my motorcycle, I know, like, there's going to be some insects that fly into my helmet, and they're going to be dead. That's kind of an inevitable consequence of my life. Like, there's no way of going through life without killing an insect. But the thing is, it's when you go out of your way to kill an insect. I don't care if it's even as insignificant of a life form as an ant. If you go out of your way to kill it, I think that's really horribly wrong. What are, like, really, on the cosmic scale, are you any more valuable than an ant? I'm sure there's a creature
a lot more valuable.
I am sure there's a creature that sees you as an ant. So, like, if you can recognize that these creatures can experience well-being, that they are sentient and they can experience pain and suffering and they have a will to live, why would you go out of your way to hurt them? It's just doesn't make any sense. Now, if I were to drive a car and I knew for a fact, like if I had a crystal ball and I knew if I were to go out on and drive a car today, I would hit a person, I wouldn't drive that day. But the thing is, like, I know I'm going to end up killing insects while I'm driving, but like you have to be able to live. So on that level, yeah, I do consider humans a lot more valuable, obviously. But when you go out of your way to kill even insignificant life forms, I just think that's wrong. I don't see myself as so amazing and magnificent that I can just, step on an anthill because I'm awesome and they don't matter. Like, I don't matter. So why would I say they just don't matter at all?
Well, but stepping on an anthill would be different than like eating a bunch of ants or krill. If you thought
Right.
that it could help, it could extend your life or benefit your health in some way.
I know it's a little different, but I don't see it that way. Like, I don't see how eating ants would extend my life. So,
so like you never answered my supplement question. Like, let's say people in the past who they didn't have all these advanced supplements you have. They didn't even have B12 supplements or DHA algae supplements. Would those people, in the very least, would they be ethically justified in eating some animal products? Our ancestors.
Yeah. If they absolutely had to survive, then yeah. I know. I was actually talking, like, in my old apartment, there was a guy in the building who noticed my vegan shirt, and I think he was like really old, 90 or something, and he was asking, "Oh, you're vegan, eh?" And then I said, "Yeah." So then he mentioned he was a medical doctor for a really, really long time. Back when he was practicing in the early days, he said the only way they had to cure B12 deficiency was to make people eat raw beef liver. So everyone hated doing that. And he said even like meat eaters would get B12 deficient occasionally, but it happened mostly with vegetarians. Then he said finally they actually synthesized B12 and he could just give injections. So like, look, before that time, like, sure, if you absolutely needed to live, I don't think it's reasonable to say, oh, well, you have to kill yourself because, you have to kill an animal to live. Like, that's just unreasonable. But we've gotten to the point now where, we can live perfectly healthy without eating any animals. And the research is quite clear that animal products increase risk of chronic disease. Vegans can live very long, healthy lives. So there's just no justification now.
And let's say in the future we develop lab-grown meat. At that point, you would have no problems with vegans eating lab-grown meat because it's not hurting any animals, right? Is that the case? So in the future, you might not even advocate for veganism at that point. When we have lab-grown meat, you might say, well, eat some lab-grown meat if you want, because there's no ethical issues with that, right?
Well, that would still be vegan. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with eating animal products. It's an ethical position where you reduce animal suffering, death as much as reasonably possible. So lab-grown meat, assuming the technology is different, right now lab-grown meat actually isn't vegan. They have to take embryos of whatever animal you want, like a pig or a cow, and then you have to make a culture out of that cell line, and they have to keep doing that. Apparently, they can't just infinitely grow the cell line. So it's a little better, but it's still not actually vegan. There was some guy from Israel who made a Kickstarter, and he was saying he developed some new method of growing meat in a culture that doesn't involve that. You just need one cell line and you could grow meat infinitely. As far as I know, he hasn't actually made a working prototype yet. So, like, I'd imagine eventually in the future they'd have that. I wouldn't have any ethical issue against that, but I would still recommend people not eat that crap because it will increase the risk of disease. By the way, with the B12 question you mentioned, you can get B12 from natural sources. Like, I know some people after this debate will say, oh, you admit you can't be vegan naturally. Well, B12 does actually naturally exist in the environment. It does exist in fresh water. typically on the soil. There's also a lot of B12 from the bacteria,
Yeah.
but just because of modern farming practices and the way we treat our water, you can't actually get natural sources of B12.
And you did answer my depression question as far as like why more vegans have depression. You would just say that's because low fat. It's just generally that the vegans tend to eat lesser fat, and that's why you would contribute to the depression.
Not necessarily.
And what's the correlation?
I think it's multifactorial. For one thing, vegans and vegetarians do tend to be smarter on average, and intelligence is actually associated with higher levels of depression. They also tend to be younger, and age also impacts this. And probably, like, just the typical, trend of, like, nutrient intake. Like, okay, they tend to eat lower fat diets. That might contribute to it as well. And just the culture around, like, veganism. There's just a lot of thoughtful, mindful people who are kind of angry who get into veganism. And, I'm sure those people, oh, I cut out for a second. I'm sure those people tend to just have high rates of depression. So I think I think a lot of it has to do with just the culture surrounding it. But also there might be some like dietary aspects that might contribute.
Do you feel like there's I feel like within the vegan movement, there's a lot more misanthropic attitudes. I've even gotten this kind of vibe from you and your videos, this kind of almost hatred of humanity. That is definitely more common in the vegan movement, wouldn't you say? And do you think that's a problem that vegans seem to, in some sense, they even prefer animals over humans? A lot of times I see vegans saying this sort of thing. In your mind, is that a problem that people seem to love animals more than humans? Sometimes,
like, here's the thing, like, people do this a lot where they also conflate veganism with like social justice, like feminism and shit. The thing is, any kind of like left-wing leaning group, you're going to find these trends. I mean, you can find the same trends in the atheist sort of category where, yeah, they tend to be misanthropic. They tend to kind of be nihilist. They tend, like, a lot of them tend to be left-leaning. There's a lot of social justice warriors in the atheist community. I think it's the same kind of thing here where just for whatever reason, there's this cultural trend where, there's people who are misanthropic who tend to be vegan. There's people who are misanthropic who tend to be atheist. And I think it's like kind of reasonable to an extent. There's a point in which it becomes ridiculous. I know there's a vegan YouTuber on here who actually wants to annihilate all of humanity from existence with like nuclear weapons. You can get to like points of ridiculousness, but
that's antinatalism, right?
Well, that's like way beyond antinatalism, but like I think to a certain extent it's reasonable to be a misanthrope. Like, but when you take it to the point of wanting to annihilate all of humanity, it kind of gets insane. But yeah, I mean, I hate most people I come across. They're stupid, ignorant. They annoy me. So, like, I think it's kind of reasonable to be a misanthrope.
Okay, well, this brings me to my next question, which is like, this came up with your interview with Amy, and I've always asked this question. I asked this question to Amy, and you kind of exposed her on Twitter, which is, I asked her, would you save your dog over a random human being?
Right.
And I want to know what you would say to that question. Would you save your dog over a random human being?
Yeah. Yeah, I probably would. Yeah, I personally like my dog more than, your average human. If it was my wife, I'd save my wife over the dog. Maybe if it was a close friend of mine, I'd actually have to ask my wife about that first, like, because I have to live with her after. So, like, if there's a trolley situation, I'd ask Jasmine, who should I save, my best friend or the dog? And then, if she chooses the dog, well, goodbye, best friend. But yeah, these are sort of odd moral gray areas. Like, yeah, I mean, it looks kind of ridiculous when you say you'd rather save a dog than a human, but like, let's be honest, there are personal factors. Like, we're not like moral robots where it's like, okay, well, this person has a higher value than this person, so like I'll kill this person. Like, let's say there's somebody who's on the cusp of developing a cure for cancer, and there's my wife, and we have a trolley situation, and I could choose to kill one or the other. Okay, well, the person who's developing, like, the cure for cancer, maybe he'd have an overall, benefit to humanity, but am I really gonna like be expected to kill my wife, who like I love, just because this person is developing a cure for cancer? So, there's these odd situations where, in the abstract, it seems ridiculous to say, oh, you'd rather save a human than a dog. But, we don't really ever run into these problems. I think, from just the discussion we're having here, it's reasonable enough to say, let's just not kill and eat animals for no reason. Yeah, so that's my answer.
See, to me, it's like that hints to an underlying, I guess I would say, I mean, to me, that's a problem. I mean, that's like, it irritates me because I always ask that question to a lot of people. It's like, and that random human being could be anyone. So it could just be like,
yeah.
So to me, you act like this whole veganism is about ethics and then you say something like that, where you would actually save your dog over a random human being. And to me, it's like that kind of exposes that, because like, how could you say you care about ethics when you would actually save an animal, your own animal, over a human being? That could be me.
Well, look. To be fair, Finn is fucking adorable. And secondly, there are a lot of fucking there are a lot of meat eaters who'd say the same thing. Amy is one of them. So
That's true.
Again, it's not like human beings are perfect moral robots. Again, if we made this sound a little more reasonable, where you could either save your wife or girlfriend or save somebody who's developing a cure for cancer, are you like, you know what I mean? So we're not perfect moral robots. I think to some extent it's reasonable to excuse someone for having like a really strong emotional attachment to someone or even a dog. So, and to really, like, just practically speaking, we don't really ever run into these moral issues. So
Yeah, it's a weird hypothetical, just like the weird hypothetical you put towards me that, yeah, that probably makes me look bad in the eyes of a lot of people too, the answer I gave to your hypothetical question.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So, yeah, I guess I don't have any other questions for you. I think it's cool that you want to live forever. That was like the big question I wanted to ask you. So that we share that in common. You at least want to live forever. A lot of people don't. Like, what do you think about all these people that don't even want to live forever? Isn't that kind of stupid, would you say?
I don't think there's any way of escaping existence. So you're kind of going to live forever no matter what. So you might as well just work on trying to improve the life you have, because who knows? You might become a spider or an ant or some lowly other creature. So just enjoy the life you have.
So you sound pretty confident of the way you phrased that. You sound pretty confident of reincarnation, like your actual consciousness goes on almost.
No, not necessarily. I'm not saying that your actual consciousness,
Yeah,
like,
you're just saying the matter, the matter of that makes you gets recycled or whatever.
You kind of become all the other organisms on the planet. So you might as well try to live as long with the life you have, because chances are it's better than how a lot of other living beings have it. So you might as well try to live forever and make the best of the life you have.
As far as a priority though, like, where do you think living forever is in your sense of priorities? Is that very high on your set of priorities, or is it like kind of you don't care that much? Or
I guess being ethical and like enjoying the life I have is a slightly higher priority than living forever. Because, like, again, on my birthday or something, I'll eat cake and You know, it's not good for you. So if it was my absolute highest priority, I wouldn't ever do that. But I also want to enjoy myself.
Mhm. Yeah, I also wanted to ask you, like, could you ever see yourself advocating for anti-aging as a part of your ethical vegan movement? Because in essence, all these animals are eventually going to die, regardless of how much you help them and save their lives. They're all going to die of aging and disease. Wouldn't you want to? I would think, as a vegan, someone who wants to help the animals, wouldn't you want to cure aging so you could eventually cure the aging of the animals and make the animals live forever, just like you yourself would want to live forever? Would you want to bestow that benefit to animals that they could also live forever?
I don't know. That could go down. The cultural, like, and practical implications of that could be really weird. Like, if you were to just, like, if we had a dart gun where you could shoot anti-aging serum into, like, any animal, you probably wouldn't want to do that in the wilderness because that would really fuck up the ecological balance of things, chances are. I don't even know if that's a good idea for pets. Like, it's strange. I don't know what the actual result of that would be. Like, it would be great if I could have Finn or someone, or like any of my pets, live like indefinitely, but I don't know. I don't know if they'd want to live forever. Like, maybe Finn would, because he's just always happy no matter what. But
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm just not entirely sure what, like, all the implications of that would be.
Have you ever asked Jasmine if she wants to live forever?
I don't think she does. I could
Really?
ask her after, though. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting question. You should also ask her if she'd save the dog, the dog over a random human.
I can say with a very high degree of certainty she'd save the dog over pretty much anyone. Maybe even me. I'm not sure though.
That's crazy. You should ask her that one, like if
Yeah.
she'd save the
Yeah.
dog over you. 'Cause
Yeah. I think
that's
she would. I think
funny.
I have actually asked her that before, and she said she'd pick Finn over me. Yeah, our dog.
Wow, that's crazy. That would annoy me. That would annoy me.
Really?
If
Well, Finn
that
is
would.
fucking cute.
Oh man, just the value of human life, though.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever. Can't be perfect, right?
So I guess
Emotions get in the way of things.
yeah, I guess this has turned in more of an interview than a debate.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
fun
yeah.
just asking you these questions
Um,
because I've known about your channel for a long time. I've wanted to ask you some of these things, and
yeah, yeah.
it's great to finally get to do that.
It was a good debate and discussion, though. I like how you didn't try to talk over me and horseshit me the entire time like Amy did. So I appreciate that.
You're welcome. I'm glad you exposed Amy's where I can't I still have when I talk to Amy, I'm gonna have to ask her like, what the heck? She'd rather she says she's on team people, okay? But she'd save her dog over a random human being. To me, that's a conflict. That
Right.
she can't just say she's on team people. Like, I'm really on team people. If I had a pet, I would not save my pet over a random human being. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to get on her case about that. But
Well, if she's claiming she's on Team People, then she really should support a vegan position because animal agriculture doesn't benefit humanity. And I pointed that out, but she tried to horseshit me the entire time. So,
see,
but
I think there's still room for, like, we could debate about this, but I think there's still room for like small homestead farms, and I don't think that's gonna like destroy humanity. I think like that's
it
you can
wouldn't
do it
destroy it wouldn't destroy humanity. I agree, but I still don't think it's ethical, and I don't think it's of any benefit to us.
in a sense. Like, aren't animals being treated better on these farms than they would in nature? Like, in nature, there's gonna be like animals just ripping these cows to shreds and like eating them alive, and we're giving them a good life. And then the way we kill the cows, I mean, I'm not even advocating for killing cows, but let's say people did. It's like it's just a bolt gun to the head. It's really quick, as opposed to in nature, they're always going to be suffering. You're never going to eliminate the suffering of animals in nature. They're always going to be suffering more in nature than they would ever suffer on a farm.
That's a similar argument that I've heard some, like, really racist ethno-nationalists I've heard make. I've seen a few ethno-nationalist channels say the apartheid was justified because the overall living status of black people was better. They were making a higher overall income and violence was less. But would you support the apartheid and take away human rights just for the sake of like improving some measures of well-being? I think people really value freedom over pretty much everything else, and I think animals do as well. So just because you're improving their some measures of measures of well-being, like okay, they're going to live longer, they're not going to have to hunt for food and shit like this. I think animals value freedom in a similar way we do. And that's why you see so many animals try to fucking escape captivity.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, you're saying if your dog could survive in nature, you would kind of just let your dog go just for the sake of its own freedom?
If he'd prefer, sure. But I'm not really in favor of pets to begin with for that reason, basically. I'd prefer a world where nobody owned any pets at all, and we just left animals alone and just let them live in nature the way they want to. Just because, Finn was being abused in his old home, and we rescued him, and he's living in a better situation now. But it's still not ideal. Like if he could actually live in the wild naturally, like he can't obviously because he's like a tiny dog and everything. But say if he was like a wolf, basically, I'd rather him live out in the wild where he had his own sense of freedom. He could mate with any dog he wanted. He could make his own pack, do whatever the fuck he wanted. I'd rather him live that life than like a comfortable life with us. And I'd rather live a life like that. Like, I don't want people just like I don't want somebody ruling over me and telling me what to do, even if it would make me more money, even if like I'd live longer. I just want to be able to do what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. All right, this is like a last question I'm thinking of is if you had to choose really quickly between people and animals, which would you choose?
What, to kill off?
Sure.
I guess people.
You would act so wow. You would actually,
no, not kill off. No, sorry. I mean, I'd let them live.
you'd let the people live.
The reason for that is human beings are capable of they're more intelligent. They have a higher level of sentience, greater ability to experience well-being. And honestly, like I think if we kill people off, we're just going to come back again, maybe in a slightly different form. We're just part of the evolutionary process, and you have to reach humanity, and then there's a next step. So killing us off just doesn't make any sense from an evolutionary standpoint. You're just basically losing several billion years of evolution.
And I would say maybe the hugest important factor of human beings is we have the potential to live forever. Like really, and animals, animals are not gonna live forever without our help, right? It's like we have to live forever, and we can do that because we have all this potential because of our powerful brains and everything.
Well, I'd kind of agree with that. Like, I think the next step in our evolution is really AI. I think that's where things are going. And you need human beings to develop AI. I think that's going to be like super intelligent, sentient AI. I think that's the next step in evolution above humanity. So that's why I'd choose humans over all other animals. But that doesn't mean they don't deserve moral consideration. And considering that we can live long, happy lives free of disease without eating animals, that's why I'm vegan.
All right. Yeah, I guess that's it'd be cool to talk to you sometime on my channel about like just a conversation centered more around living forever and ideas relating to eternal life and death. I'd love to hear more about that. But I guess that's good for this. I don't have any other questions unless you want to have like a closing statement. You could just end it up. End it off.
I just think your idea that eating fish or maybe some insects will help you live longer is pretty much just nonsense. And even if we could demonstrably prove that eating fish occasionally would extend your life by 2 to 3 years, I still don't see that as a moral justification to eat animals. And I think the research is quite clear. Animal products increase risk of chronic disease, lowers life expectancy. So that's my position.
And I guess my closing statement would be, it's like, yeah, I tried my best to prove that we need animals and like we need to eat animal products, but like even if I can't prove that, like, even if I did a really sucky job of like proving that, I would ethically defend eating meat. I mean, even like I would ethically defend eating animal products, including meat, if the person feels they need it, just for the sake of like if they even feel that they might possibly need it, because there's so many unknown. The science hasn't really gotten there to where we can. I don't think we can definitely say for sure that everyone can be a vegan in the long term, especially when I look at all these ex-vegan testimonials. To me, that is a source of evidence that we should take into consideration. It just seems like oftentimes this extreme veganism goes bad eventually. And I realize that people have a lot of different stores of these nutrients, and I do think to a certain point they might hit a wall, and you might even experience this in the future, where you might need to tell your whole audience, "Hey, look, people, I can't do this anymore. Like, I'm going to eat some raw milk." And I don't think if it ever does come to that, I don't think you should feel bad about that, because like I don't feel that vegans should guilt trip themselves into feeling like they have to be vegan for ethical reasons. Like, there comes a point where your health is more important, and just the chance that you might develop a deficiency, that's a gamble that people shouldn't they shouldn't force themselves to gamble in that way and risk their health if they felt that it is a risk at the end.
Okay. I think it'd be good to kind of continue this debate along those lines again. Maybe read some more research and then maybe come back and we can discuss some of the shit too. Because it is a really complex, long topic. There's a lot to get into. So maybe we could set up another debate.
I'll definitely do some more research, because you got me thinking along some tracks that I really hadn't thought about, and you got me considering a lot of issues. And clearly, you pointed out to me that there's a lot more I don't really know, and I need to like learn more about this stuff so I can defend my positions more as far as the health stuff. All right.
All right, cool. And I'll link your channel in the description down below after the debate, and I'll upload this to my main channel as well. So
great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me. It's fun.
All right. Sweet. Take care.
Bye. You too.